The summer air was thick with warmth as Hermione Granger leaned against her bedroom window, her books neatly stacked on the sill. She had been deep into her reading again, a book on advanced magical theory that she had borrowed from Flourish and Blots on her last visit to Diagon Alley. Hermione had always been different from the rest of her peers, not only for her intellect, but for her ability to focus so completely on her own goals. She wanted to be the best which she could possibly become, and every moment spent daydreaming or engaging in unnecessary distractions was, to her, a waste of time. Most people assumed Hermione's closest ties would naturally be with Harry Potter. After all, he was the boy who lived, the one who drew attention from everyone in the wizarding world. They had met in their first year at Hogwarts, shared adventures, and faced countless dangers side by side. Yet Hermione had always felt a quiet distance between herself and Harry. He was brave, kind, and courageous, yes, but she had never felt the spark of admiration others seemed to expect of her. Harry was her friend, nothing more, and Hermione had decided long ago that she would never let herself slip into liking him in the way so many other girls did. It was not jealousy nor resentment. It was simply practicality. Hermione saw Harry as someone who carried too heavy a burden. He was constantly thrown into the spotlight, constantly pursued by enemies, constantly the target of whispers in the corridors. Hermione did not dislike him, but she could not bring herself to imagine tying her feelings to someone who could never truly live a peaceful life. And if Hermione valued anything above all else, it was stability, control, and purpose. When the letter arrived announcing the beginning of their 4th year at Hogwarts, Hermione packed with her usual care. She had been invited by the Weasleys to stay with them before the Quidditch World Cup, but she politely declined. It was not that she did not enjoy their company, but she wanted time to herself to reflect on the coming year. She knew Hogwarts was changing. With rumors of a dangerous tournament being revived, she sensed that her focus would be tested more than ever. On the 1st of September, Hermione boarded the train as always, her luggage carefully tucked away, Crookshanks purring softly in his carrier. She found a compartment with Ron, who waved eagerly, and Harry, who smiled tiredly, as though weighed down already by the stares of those around them. "You look well, Hermione," Harry said, his voice calm but laced with fatigue. "Thank you," she replied with her usual politeness, taking her seat opposite him. Ron grinned. "Blimey, you've probably read half the library by now." Hermione smirked. "Only what I needed to prepare for the year ahead. I am not about to slack off now, not when we're moving into more difficult subjects." The train rattled on, filled with the excited chatter of students discussing the year's rumors. Hermione listened, but did not contribute much. She noticed, however, that Harry seemed more unsettled than usual. His eyes darted to the windows, his hand gripped his wand tightly at odd moments, and he spoke less than usual. Hermione wondered if it had something to do with his scar, but she decided not to pry. Harry rarely spoke about his worries openly unless pressed, and Hermione had promised herself not to involve herself too deeply in matters she could not control. Arriving at Hogwarts, the great hall glittered with its usual magic. The Sorting Hat sang a new song, reminding students of bravery and unity, though Hermione could not help but notice a more ominous undertone than in previous years. As Dumbledore stood and announced the revival of the Triwizard Tournament, the hall erupted in cheers and whispers. Hermione did not cheer. She knew the dangers of such tournaments. She knew the risks were far too high for the excitement to justify them. She folded her arms, her mind racing as she thought of the countless injuries, the centuries of blood spilled in the name of glory. Later, when she and Harry walked back to the Gryffindor common room, Harry broke the silence. "You're awfully quiet about the tournament, Hermione. I thought you'd be excited about the challenge." "Excited?" Hermione frowned. "Harry, do you realize how dangerous this is? People have died in this tournament. And besides, it is restricted to older students for a reason. You should not even think about entering." Harry laughed lightly. "I would not. I know better than that." She studied his face carefully, but saw nothing except his usual honesty. Still, she remained cautious. Ron, on the other hand, seemed thrilled at the idea. "Imagine the glory," Ron whispered excitedly. "Whoever gets chosen, their name goes down in history." Hermione gave him a sharp look. "Glory is not worth risking your life for." The days passed, and the school brimmed with excitement as the goblet of fire was brought forth. Students from Durmstrang and Beauxbatons arrived, and the air of rivalry thickened. Hermione kept to her studies, refusing to be swept up in the frenzy. But when Harry's name was unexpectedly drawn from the goblet, the world shifted. The entire hall gasped. Hermione felt her stomach drop, but not for the same reason as the others. She did not feel betrayal or jealousy. She did not feel anger that Harry had entered when he promised not to. What she felt was inevitability. This was Harry's life, after all. Always chosen, always dragged into peril, always singled out. Hermione closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them, her expression calm and composed. She would stand by him, yes, but she reminded herself once again that her heart must never become entangled. She whispered quietly to herself as the hall erupted into chaos. This is why I will never let myself like him. The Gryffindor common room buzzed with chatter long into the night after Harry's name came out of the goblet. Students crowded around him, voices rising with excitement, disbelief, and suspicion. Some congratulated him. Others muttered accusations that he had cheated the system. Ron sat beside Harry wide-eyed, his expression torn between admiration and resentment. Hermione sat apart, her book open in her lap though she hardly read a word. She observed Harry carefully, his jaw tense, his eyes darting between the crowd as if he wished to disappear. She could tell he had not entered the tournament. Harry was many things, but he was not a liar. Still, that truth did not make her feel at ease. When the common room had emptied, and Ron had gone to bed muttering about how Harry might have found a clever trick, Hermione closed her book and approached Harry. He was slouched in an armchair by the fire, his face half-shadowed in the flickering light. "Harry," she began softly, "I believe you." His eyes flicked up, relief flooding them, though he said nothing. "But belief does not change the reality," she continued firmly. "You are bound to the tournament now, and that means you must prepare properly. You cannot simply charge in and hope for the best. You will need research, strategy, and every ounce of knowledge you can gather." Harry gave a small, grateful smile. "That's why I'm glad you're here, Hermione." She nodded, but her heart remained steady. She had decided long ago not to be swept into Harry's world more than necessary. Yet here she was, offering her help because she could not stomach the thought of losing a friend to recklessness. It was not affection that drove her, but duty. The following days were a blur of tension. The other houses whispered openly about Harry, mocking him in corridors, accusing him of seeking fame. Even Ron grew distant, his jealousy flaring in ways Hermione found both childish and exhausting. "He must have found a way," Ron muttered one evening, glaring across the table at Harry. "He never tells us everything, does he?" Hermione snapped her book shut with a sharp sound. "Honestly, Ron, are you even listening to yourself? Harry would never cheat. He doesn't want this, can't you see?" Ron's ears went red, and he stormed off without another word. Harry gave Hermione a weary look, but she raised a hand before he could thank her. "I am not defending you for your sake, Harry," she said briskly. "I am defending the truth. And the truth is, you are as much a victim of this as anyone else." Harry chuckled faintly. "Sometimes I think you're the only one who sees things that way." As the first task drew closer, Hermione buried herself in research. She combed through volumes on magical contests, creatures, and spells, compiling lists of charms and defensive techniques Harry might use. She pressed the books into his hands one after another, drilling him with practice whenever she could. Harry, to his credit, listened, though she could tell his nerves were fraying. On the day of the first task, Hermione stood with the other students, her hands clenched tightly around the rail of the stands. The air was filled with the roars of dragons, the crackle of fire, and the screams of excitement from the crowd. She refused to cheer. Her eyes never left Harry as he faced his dragon, every movement a gamble between life and death. When Harry finally soared across the arena on his broomstick, snatching the golden egg from beneath the dragon's nose, Hermione let out the breath she had been holding. She clapped politely, nothing more, her face composed even as her chest tightened with relief. She told herself it was because her preparation had worked, not because she cared more than she should. That evening in the common room, students crowded Harry again, this time with admiration instead of suspicion. Ron had returned to his side, his envy overshadowed by awe. Hermione, however, stayed quiet, sitting at the edge of the room with her parchment spread before her. She made notes on the next possible dangers Harry might face, ignoring the laughter and celebrations around her. Later, when Harry slipped away from the noise and found her in the corner, he sat down with a sigh. "You didn't celebrate." Hermione glanced up. "You do not need me to celebrate, Harry. You need me to keep you alive." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "You really are something else, Hermione." She met his eyes, her voice cool but steady. "Just remember this, Harry. I am not here because you are Harry Potter. I am here because you are my friend. Nothing more." Harry looked puzzled for a moment, but then smiled gratefully. Hermione quickly turned back to her parchment, her heart steady, her resolve unbroken. She would help him, yes, but she would never allow herself to fall into the trap of feeling more. Yet as she wrote, a quiet voice whispered in her mind, a question she did not want to confront. Was helping Harry without feeling something more truly possible? The weeks after the first task passed in a blur of preparation, whispers, and growing tension at Hogwarts. Though Harry had proven himself against the dragon, the murmurs of doubt had not vanished completely. Some students now praised him, while others still suggested he had cheated. Ron returned to his side, eager to share in the glory, but Hermione noticed the cracks that lingered beneath their friendship. Harry carried his golden egg everywhere, its shrill screech echoing through the common room whenever he opened it. Most students groaned at the noise, but Hermione leaned forward with keen interest, her mind already whirring through possibilities. "This is a clue," she said firmly one evening as Harry slammed the egg shut in frustration. "You just have not figured out how to interpret it yet." "Well, it sounds like banshees having a screaming contest," Ron muttered, flopping onto the couch. "If that's supposed to help, I'd rather give up now." Hermione shot him a sharp look. "This is exactly why you are not in the tournament, Ron. It takes patience and persistence. Harry, we will figure this out." Harry gave her a weak smile. "You mean you will?" She opened her mouth to deny it, then paused. He was right. She was already neck-deep in research, combing through books about magical objects, underwater creatures, and ancient contests. She did not mind. It was what she was best at, but she reminded herself once more that this was about helping a friend survive, not about any deeper bond. The Yule Ball announcement shifted the atmosphere at Hogwarts. Suddenly, the focus was not on the next task, but on who would ask whom to the dance. The corridors buzzed with gossip and giggles, and even the most studious students seemed distracted. Hermione, however, rolled her eyes at the fuss. "I do not see what is so exciting about a ball," she said one afternoon in the library. "It is just dancing, which is hardly academic." Ron snorted. "Easy for you to say. You probably already have some clever plan." Hermione ignored him, sliding another book across the table toward Harry. But later that evening, when she looked into the mirror, she caught herself wondering. Did she want to go? Did she care? She quickly shook the thought away. She had decided long ago that Harry was not an option, and Ron's childishness irritated her too much. If she attended, it would be for herself alone, nothing more. When the night of the Yule Ball arrived, Hermione shocked everyone. She stepped into the hall with her hair tamed into elegant curls, her periwinkle blue dress flowing gracefully as she descended the staircase. Whispers spread through the crowd. Students who had always dismissed her as the bookish know-it-all now gawked in astonishment. Her date, Victor Crumb, walked proudly beside her. Hermione had accepted his invitation after some hesitation, intrigued by the quiet intelligence behind his broken English and his unexpected respect for her abilities. Unlike many, he did not see her merely as Harry's friend. He saw her as Hermione, which was a refreshing change. Ron's jaw nearly hit the floor when he saw her. His eyes darkened with something between jealousy and anger, but Hermione ignored him. Harry smiled faintly at her, though she noticed the confusion in his eyes. Perhaps he had never expected her to appear like this, but she was glad to surprise him. As she danced with Victor, Hermione felt a strange sense of freedom. For once, she was not defined by her books, her cleverness, or her loyalty to Harry. For once, she was simply a girl enjoying a moment of recognition. Yet the night was not without its complications. Ron confronted her after the ball, his voice sharp with accusation. "You could have told us," he snapped, his ears red. "Going with Victor Crumb, of all people? What were you thinking?" Hermione's temper flared. What I was thinking, Ron, is that I do not need to explain myself to you. I am allowed to make choices for myself. And if Victor happens to value me for who I am, that is more than I can say for you." Harry tried to intervene, but Hermione cut him off. "Do not, Harry. This is between Ron and me." Ron stormed off, muttering under his breath, and Harry gave Hermione an apologetic glance before following him. For a moment, Hermione stood alone, her hands trembling slightly. She hated conflict, but she refused to let Ron dictate her choices. The next day, whispers about her and Victor spread quickly. Some mocked her, others were impressed, but Hermione walked through the halls with her head high. She had learned something important. She did not need Harry's attention or Ron's approval to define her worth. Still, the tournament loomed. The golden egg remained unsolved, and Hermione's determination only sharpened. One evening, as Harry sat brooding with it in his lap, Hermione placed a hand on his arm. "Listen to me, Harry," she said quietly. "This is not just about cleverness. Sometimes the answer comes from looking at things differently. Try to listen to it not just as noise, but as something hidden beneath the noise." Harry frowned but nodded. For the first time, Hermione saw a spark of understanding in his eyes. She leaned back, satisfied, and told herself once again that her role was clear. She would guide Harry with her mind, but never with her heart. Unbeknownst to her, however, the choice she had made, to separate her feelings from her loyalty, was about to be tested in ways she had not anticipated. The days following the Yule Ball carried a strange heaviness for Hermione. On the surface, life at Hogwarts returned to its rhythm of lessons, homework, and Quidditch practice, yet she noticed subtle shifts in the people around her. Ron avoided her eyes, speaking to her only when necessary, and always with a tone edged in bitterness. Harry tried to act as though nothing had changed, but Hermione caught the unease in his expressions whenever Ron and she exchanged cold words. Victor, meanwhile, continued to write her small notes in his careful, broken English. He sought her out in the library, not for fame or recognition, but simply to sit in quiet companionship. Hermione found it refreshing, though she did not fool herself into believing it was more than a fleeting connection. Victor would return to Durmstrang, and she had no intention of tying her life to someone she barely knew. Still, she appreciated his attention. It was a reminder that she was not invisible, that she was not simply Harry Potter's clever friend. The golden egg, however, still demanded her attention. Hermione could not ignore it, no matter how the noise scraped against her ears. She knew there was a secret within it, and she would not rest until it was solved. She encouraged Harry to try different approaches, but it was only when Cedric Diggory passed a cryptic hint, "Take a bath," that Harry finally made progress. Hermione was both amused and annoyed. "Honestly, Harry, if you had just told me Cedric gave you a clue, I would have helped you interpret it straight away. A bath, really. It is not that complicated." Harry grinned sheepishly. "Well, it worked, didn't it?" That night, Hermione sat with him near the fireplace as he recounted the voices he had heard when he submerged the egg in the prefect's bathroom. Merpeople, underwater, and a stolen treasure to be retrieved within an hour. Her quill scratched furiously across parchment as she listed spells, breathing techniques, and magical plants that could help. "This task will not be about speed, Harry," she explained, tapping the parchment. "It will be about endurance, about controlling your fear. You must think clearly underwater, and that will be much harder than you expect." Harry nodded, listening intently. Hermione saw determination in his face, and for a fleeting moment, she felt proud. But she quickly smothered the warmth rising in her chest. Pride was harmless. Attachment was dangerous. When the day of the second task arrived, the icy February air cut through the lake's surface. Hermione stood among the cheering crowd, her breath clouding in the cold. She watched as Harry dove beneath the water, her nails biting into her palms as the minutes stretched. The crowd grew restless, students murmuring about whether he would return. Then he did, bursting from the lake with Ron in tow, followed by the other champions. His hair was plastered to his head, his face pale with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with relief. The crowd erupted into cheers, but Hermione felt a lump in her throat as she realized something. Harry had not only rescued Ron but had refused to leave the other hostages behind, even when it meant risking his own success. He had nearly lost because of his determination to save more than he was required to. Hermione's chest tightened with conflicting emotions. She admired his selflessness, yet she reminded herself that this very trait was why she could never allow herself to like him. His bravery would always put him in danger, always pull him into sacrifice. He was not someone who could ever live a quiet, safe life, and Hermione knew she craved stability too much to follow him down that path. That evening, as Gryffindor celebrated Harry's unexpected triumph, Hermione retreated to a quieter corner of the common room. Harry eventually found her there, dropping onto the chair beside her with a tired smile. "You saw what happened?" he asked, his voice rough. "Of course I did," she replied, closing her book gently. "You nearly failed because you tried to save everyone." Harry shrugged. "I couldn't just leave them behind. It felt wrong." Hermione sighed, her eyes softening despite herself. "That is exactly who you are, Harry. You will always put others before yourself, even when it endangers you. I suppose that is why people follow you, even when they should not." He gave her a questioning look, but she did not elaborate. Instead, she handed him a small list she had been working on. "Spells to practice before the third task. You should start soon. The maze will not be forgiving." Harry took it, his fingers brushing hers briefly. Hermione pulled her hand back quickly, her pulse quickening in spite of her resolve. She stood, gathering her books. "Good night, Harry." As she climbed the stairs to her dormitory, Hermione whispered to herself the same words she had repeated since the beginning of the year. "He is my friend." Nothing more. But even as she said it, she felt the weight of doubt pressing heavier than before. Spring settled over Hogwarts with a deceptive calm. The air was warmer, the grounds greener, but beneath the surface tension rippled through the school. The Triwizard Tournament had claimed no lives yet, but everyone knew the third task would be the most dangerous of all. Hermione could feel the weight of it every time she glanced at Harry, who carried himself with quiet determination despite the constant whispers and stares. Ron had mended things with him, though the air between the three of them was never quite the same. Ron's jealousy of the ball still simmered beneath the surface, and Hermione could sense it in the way his eyes flickered toward her whenever Victor's name came up. She chose not to dwell on it. Ron's immaturity was not her responsibility. What did weigh on her was the future, the maze that loomed ahead, twisting and unpredictable. Hermione buried herself in research again, compiling spells and tactics for Harry. She sat with him late into the night in the library, quizzing him on charms to repel creatures, curses to disarm enemies, and defensive wards that could buy him time. One evening, Harry closed his book with a tired sigh. "Hermione, you're the only reason I've even gotten this far." She looked up, startled. "Do not say that, Harry. You have courage and instinct. Those are things no book can teach." "Yeah, but courage doesn't tell me which spell to use when something tries to kill me," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. Hermione returned the smile faintly, but her heart stayed steady. She knew what he was really saying, that she was his anchor. And while that touched her, it also frightened her. Anchors could sink, after all, and Hermione could not allow herself to be dragged down into emotions she had promised to resist. As the day of the third task approached, an unease spread through the castle. The maze had been grown on the Quidditch pitch, its towering hedges looming ominously, blocking out the view of what lay inside. Students speculated wildly about what creatures and enchantments might await, but Hermione knew better than to waste time on guesses. All she could do was prepare Harry for as many possibilities as she could imagine. The night before the task, Hermione found herself unable to sleep. She sat by the common room fire, staring into the flames, her thoughts restless. Would Harry make it through? Would he even come back alive? She knew she should not think in such extremes, but the fear was real, sharp, and undeniable. Harry came down the stairs quietly, his footsteps soft against the carpet. He blinked when he saw her. "Couldn't sleep either?" She shook her head. "No. I kept thinking about tomorrow." Harry sat across from her, the firelight reflecting in his green eyes. "You worry too much, Hermione." She frowned. "Someone has to. You do not take your safety nearly as seriously as you should." He chuckled lightly. "That's what I have you for." Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire. At last, Hermione spoke, her voice low. "Just promise me, Harry. Promise me you will be careful." His gaze softened. "I promise." The next evening, the stands around the Quidditch pitch were filled with students and staff, their cheers echoing as the champions prepared to enter the maze. Hermione sat at the edge of her seat, her hands clenched tightly in her lap as she watched Harry step inside, his figure swallowed by the towering hedges. The minutes dragged. The maze shifted and twisted before their eyes, shadows flickering across its walls. Cheers rose for some champions, gasps for others. Hermione leaned forward, her heart pounding, her eyes fixed on the shifting green walls. Then it happened. A distant flash of red light, the faint echo of something darker than the rest. The crowd murmured in confusion. Hermione's breath caught in her throat as she realized something had gone wrong, though no one around her seemed to understand. When Harry finally reappeared, clutching Cedric Diggory's lifeless body, the world shattered. Gasps of horror rippled through the crowd, screams pierced the air, and Hermione's heart plummeted into her stomach. She leapt from her seat, rushing down the stands as chaos erupted. Harry collapsed on the ground, Cedric beside him, his face ashen with grief and terror. He stammered words through trembling lips. Voldemort, returned, killing curse, Death Eaters. The adults scrambled to silence him, to usher the students away, but Hermione stayed rooted, her eyes locked on Harry's haunted face. For the first time, she saw the full weight of his life, the darkness he could never escape. She had known it before, but now it was undeniable. Harry was marked, bound to a destiny far beyond his control. And in that moment, Hermione reminded herself again. This was why she could never let herself like him. To love Harry Potter was to live in constant fear, constant danger. She wanted a life where she could build her own path, not one dictated by prophecy and peril. Yet as she stood trembling in the chaos, watching Harry break under the weight of Cedric's death, she could not deny the truth that clawed at her chest. She cared deeply, more than she should. The return of Voldemort changed everything. Hogwarts, once a place of wonder and safety, became a place of whispers, fear, and denial. The Ministry refused to believe Harry, branding him a liar and troublemaker. The Daily Prophet printed venomous articles questioning his sanity, twisting every word he said. Hermione watched it all with a heavy heart. She had never doubted Harry for a moment. She had seen the truth in his eyes when Cedric's body lay cold beside him, heard the terror in his voice when he described Voldemort's return. And yet, no matter how strongly she defended him, she could not shield him from the weight of the world's disbelief. The summer was long and restless. Letters between her and Harry were intercepted, delayed, or written with careful vagueness. She spent her days reading about curses and counter-curses, determined to be ready for whatever lay ahead. When the letter finally arrived, summoning her to Grimmauld Place, she felt both relief and dread. The first sight of Harry that summer startled her. He looked older, wearier, his eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. Hermione wanted to reach out, to tell him she was there, but she reminded herself of her vow. She would not let her feelings go beyond friendship. Instead, she greeted him with warmth, but also with a firmness meant to ground him. "You should have written more," Harry said accusingly when they sat together later that evening. "I did," Hermione replied evenly. "The Ministry is interfering with everything. You must know that by now." He scowled, frustration radiating off him. "They treat me like I'm mad. Like I wanted Cedric to die." Hermione's heart twisted, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Harry, listen to me. They can say what they like, but the truth will come out. You cannot let their words break you." Her steady tone seemed to anchor him, and for a moment he closed his eyes, breathing more evenly. Hermione sat silently, resisting the urge to place her hand on his. The weeks that followed were consumed by meetings of the Order of the Phoenix, whispered plans, and grim updates. Harry, Ron, and Hermione attended the new school year at Hogwarts under the shadow of Dolores Umbridge, the Ministry's cruel representative. Her pink cardigan smile masked her venom, but Hermione saw through it immediately. While Harry's anger grew with each injustice, Hermione focused on practicality. She pushed him and Ron to study, to prepare. When Harry wanted to lash out, she reminded him of strategy. When Ron muttered complaints, she snapped him back to focus. And when the three of them, along with a group of students, formed Dumbledore's army, Hermione quietly knew she had played a crucial role. Harry shone as a leader, his natural bravery drawing others to him. Hermione admired it, but also feared it. She had seen the cost of his courage. She knew where it would lead. One winter evening, after a DA meeting, Hermione lingered as the others left. Harry slumped into a chair, running a hand through his messy hair. "They really believe in me," he said softly. "Like I can actually prepare them for what's coming." Hermione sat across from him, her gaze steady. "They believe in you because you have faced what others cannot even imagine. But Harry, do not mistake admiration for invincibility. You are still human. You must take care of yourself too." He gave her a weary smile. "That's why I've got you." Her chest tightened at the words, but she masked it with a small frown. "Yes, well, do not forget it." But deep inside, Hermione knew she was lying to herself more with each passing day. She told herself she would not like him, would not let her heart drift into dangerous territory. Yet every time she saw him lead, every time she heard the weight in his voice, every time he looked at her with that unspoken trust, the barrier she had built cracked just a little more. It was during the battle at the Department of Mysteries that her resolve nearly shattered. Chaos filled the air, flashes of curses, shouts of rage, the crash of spells colliding. Hermione fought fiercely, her wand steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. She was determined not to fall, not to let Harry face this alone. Then the curse struck her. Pain seared through her body, and she collapsed to the ground, her vision fading at the edges. Through the haze, she heard Harry shouting her name, his voice desperate and raw. For a moment, she wanted to reach for him, to tell him she was fine, to admit everything she had denied. But darkness swallowed her before she could speak. When she woke later in the hospital wing, weak but alive, Harry was sitting at her bedside. His face was pale, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but he refused to leave. "You scared me," he whispered. Hermione blinked at him, her throat dry. "I told you. I would never leave you." He gripped her hand then, and for the first time she did not pull away. But as the weight of Sirius's death settled over them both, Hermione's heart ached with renewed clarity. She could not let herself fall. To love Harry Potter was to love a life of grief and loss. And Hermione Granger was not certain she was strong enough to survive it. The following summer weighed heavily on Hermione's mind. The loss of Sirius haunted Harry, and though she wanted to console him, she knew grief was not something anyone could truly take away. She wrote letters often, carefully balancing comfort with practicality, always reminding him to stay strong and prepare for what was coming. When she saw him again before sixth year began, she noticed the difference instantly. Harry looked older, sharper, as though the grief had burned something inside him into steel. Hermione wanted to tell him she was proud of how he carried himself, but instead, she offered what she always did: logic, advice, and determination. "Do not shut yourself away, Harry," she said firmly when they met at the burrow. "You think it makes you stronger, but it only makes you vulnerable." He gave her a faint smile. "You sound like Dumbledore." Hermione straightened her shoulders. "Then perhaps you should listen." At Hogwarts, the air felt different. Slughorn's return brought new dynamics, with students vying for his favor. Hermione joined his gatherings, seeing them as opportunities for learning, though she also kept a close eye on Harry. She noticed how much attention Ginny Weasley drew from him now, subtle at first but undeniable. The way his eyes lingered on her in the common room, the way he laughed a little more freely when she was near. It was a shift Hermione could not ignore. It stung more than she expected. For years she had told herself she would never let her heart lean toward Harry, that she wanted stability, not danger. And yet, seeing him look at Ginny in a way he had never looked at her left a hollow ache inside. Ron noticed too, though his attention was often consumed by jealousy of Hermione herself. When she went to Slughorn's party with Cormac McLaggen, Ron reacted with fury, though Hermione's choice had been more about annoyance than attraction. She had wanted to prove a point, to show Ron that she did not exist solely as someone waiting in the shadows. But afterward, she felt little satisfaction. Her true frustration lay deeper. She knew Harry cared for her, but not in the way she sometimes secretly wished. He relied on her, trusted her completely, but his heart was drifting elsewhere. She told herself it was better this way. She had always believed loving Harry was impossible, dangerous. Ginny could give him something Hermione never could: lightness, a sense of normality amidst the chaos. But when Dumbledore began pulling Harry into private lessons, revealing secrets about Voldemort's past, Hermione's resolve wavered again. Harry shared pieces of it with her, and she could see the burden carving deeper lines into him. He was walking a path no one else could follow, but he always turned to her for understanding. One evening in the library, Harry slid a worn piece of parchment across the table. Riddle's family. Dumbledore thinks there's more to it. Hermione examined it, her brow furrowed. You realize what this means, don't you? It's not just about defeating Voldemort. It's about unraveling the very foundation of who he is. That is why Dumbledore trusts you with this. Harry leaned back, running a hand through his hair. Sometimes I wish he didn't. Sometimes I wish I could just be normal. Hermione's heart twisted. She wanted to tell him she wished it for him too, that she longed for him to have peace. But instead, she steadied her voice. You are not normal, Harry. And that is not a curse. It is what makes you capable of ending this. You must see that. He gave her a small, grateful smile, and once again Hermione reminded herself that this was her role. His support, his anchor. Not his love. As the year wore on, darkness crept closer. Death Eater attacks became bolder, and the tension within the school sharpened. Hermione noticed Harry and Ginny growing closer, a spark between them that no one could deny. The day they finally kissed in the common room, the Gryffindors erupted in cheers. Hermione clapped with the rest, her smile perfectly measured. But later, alone in her dormitory, she sat staring at her books without seeing the words. She whispered to herself, the words now feeling heavier than ever. He is my friend. Nothing more. When Dumbledore fell from the astronomy tower, killed by Snape's curse, the world shattered again. Harry's grief was raw, searing, and Hermione stood by him, silent but steady, her hand on his arm as he vowed to continue the fight. She wanted to tell him he was not alone, that he never would be, but she kept her words measured. Because to say more would be to cross the line she had set long ago. And yet, deep in her chest, Hermione knew the truth was becoming harder to deny. The summer after Dumbledore's death was one of the darkest Hermione could remember. The burrow was heavy with unspoken grief, and Harry seemed more determined than ever, his eyes cold with a focus she had not seen before. He spoke little of the future except to Hermione, sharing bits of his plan that excluded Hogwarts entirely. Ron listened, but often faltered, trying to lighten the mood with poor jokes that fell flat. Hermione, on the other hand, met Harry's determination with equal resolve. She knew he was preparing for something monumental, and she refused to let him face it without her. When the wedding at the Burrow turned to chaos with Death Eaters crashing through, Hermione did not hesitate. She was the one who disapparated with Harry and Ron, her bag packed with enchantments that carried everything they would need. Harry looked at her in shock, realizing she had anticipated this. You planned this? He asked when they found themselves in London. Hermione lifted her chin. Of course I did. Did you think I would let you go unprepared? That became the rhythm of their journey. Harry pushed forward with instinct and courage, Ron faltered with doubts, and Hermione anchored them both with preparation and knowledge. Nights spent in forests and abandoned homes were grueling, but Hermione kept them alive, kept them hidden. She knew Harry depended on her in ways he did not even realize. And yet, even in the darkest hours, she noticed the flickers of Ginny in his thoughts. He carried the memory of her like a flame in the storm, and Hermione could not deny the quiet sting of it. She reminded herself constantly, this was for Harry's survival, for the defeat of Voldemort. Her feelings, whatever they were, did not matter. When Ron left, bitterness boiling over, Hermione felt the hollow crack inside her widen. She wanted to scream at him for abandoning Harry when he needed them most. She wanted to cry for losing the friend who had been with her since their first year. But she swallowed all of it. Harry needed her steady. Ron made his choice, she said firmly, though her voice shook when they were alone in the tent. We will make ours. And I will not leave you, Harry. Not ever. Harry looked at her then, truly looked, as though seeing the weight she carried. For a moment he opened his mouth, perhaps to thank her, perhaps to say more, but he closed it again, lowering his eyes. Hermione turned away, relieved and yet aching at what remained unsaid. The weeks without Ron were harder than anything she had faced. She watched Harry grow thinner, paler, the locket around his neck gnawing at him with venomous whispers. At night, when he thought she was asleep, she could hear him whisper Ginny's name under his breath, clinging to the thought of her like a lifeline. Hermione lay awake, staring at the fabric of the tent, telling herself over and over that this was how it should be. When Ron returned, Hermione's relief was buried beneath anger. She wanted to throw her arms around him and scream at him all at once. But what mattered most was that Harry had his brother back, that the three of them were whole again. She buried her own feelings deep, where they would not interfere. It was during their search for the Horcruxes that Harry began to lean on Hermione more than ever. In the silence of the woods, in the dim light of their campfires, he asked her for interpretations of Dumbledore's riddles, for reminders that he was not failing. "You are not alone," she told him one night, when the silence threatened to swallow them. "You will never be alone." Harry met her eyes, and something in his gaze tightened, as though he wanted to believe more than he could. Hermione held it, steady and unflinching, until he finally nodded and looked away. The night they visited Godric's Hollow was etched into her memory. Walking with Harry through the snow-laden village, pretending to be ordinary for a fleeting moment, felt surreal. She saw the sadness in his eyes as they stood before his parents' grave, and she slipped her hand into his without thinking. He did not pull away. For a moment, they simply stood there together, silent in their grief. When Bathilda Bagshot revealed her horrifying truth, when Nagini nearly killed them, Hermione's magic saved Harry's life. She dragged him from the ruins of the house, her body shaking with fear and fury. As she tended to his wounds later, Harry whispered her name, broken with guilt. "You saved me," he breathed. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Hermione pressed her lips together, forcing herself to focus on healing. "You will never have to know, Harry. I promise you that." But as she turned away, tears slipped silently down her cheeks. Because though he needed her more than anyone else, his heart was already promised to another. And that truth hurt more than any curse ever could. The cold of winter seemed endless, pressing down on the trio as they wandered from place to place in their pursuit of the Horcruxes. Hermione's hands were raw from the cold, her lips cracked, but she never allowed herself to show weakness. Harry needed her strong, always. And so she pushed through, determined, even when her own heart was heavy. Ron's return had restored some balance, yet the air between the three of them was never quite the same. Ron often caught Hermione's gaze lingering on Harry when she thought no one noticed, and though he said nothing, his silence was sharp enough to pierce her. She did not need his words to feel the weight of what he suspected. One evening, when Harry took first watch and Ron had dozed off, Hermione sat alone near the edge of the tent. Her mind wandered to Ginny again, the way Harry spoke of her when he allowed himself rare moments of hope. Hermione imagined the future. Harry victorious, Voldemort gone, Ginny running into his arms. The image made her chest ache in a way that left her breathless. She pressed her hands to her eyes, forcing the thoughts away. Harry deserved love, deserved happiness, and Ginny gave him something Hermione could not. It was not her place to long for what she could never have. The forest around them was too still that night, and Hermione's instincts prickled. Moments later, Harry returned, his face pale, wand gripped tightly. "What is it?" she whispered. "Snatchers," he hissed. "They're nearby." Hermione's heart raced, but she did not hesitate. She gathered their things, shrinking them into her enchanted bag, and shook Ron awake. They moved quickly, but the sound of heavy boots drew nearer. Within moments, they were surrounded. The Snatchers dragged them through the woods, Hermione's mind racing. She needed a plan, something that would keep Harry safe. Her eyes flicked to him, and she saw the panic flickering there beneath his mask of bravery. It was then she acted. With quick, desperate precision, she cast a jinx on Harry's face, distorting his features until he was barely recognizable. His gasp of shock turned into understanding as the Snatchers hauled them forward, muttering about the possibility of capturing Potter. At Malfoy Manor, everything blurred together in a storm of terror. Bellatrix's voice cut through the air, sharp and manic, and Hermione's blood ran cold. She knew what was coming, and yet she stepped forward without hesitation, drawing the attention to herself. If Bellatrix focused on her, then Harry might have a chance. The Cruciatus curse tore through her, white-hot agony ripping every nerve apart. Her screams echoed in the grand hall, but even through the pain, her mind clung to one thought: protect Harry. She bit back words she wanted to cry out, refusing to reveal anything that could endanger him. When she drifted back into consciousness later, barely aware of the world, She felt Harry's hands trembling as he held hers. His voice was low, urgent, filled with guilt. "I'm so sorry, Hermione. I should never have let them." Her lips moved, dry and broken. Don't you dare blame yourself. You're alive. That's all that matters." In his eyes, she saw a storm of emotions, rage, fear, and something unspoken that almost looked like love. But she turned her face away, unable to bear it. She would not let herself hope. The escape from the manor was chaos, spells flying, Dobby's brave sacrifice cutting through the night. In the aftermath, when they buried him by the sea, Hermione stood by Harry's side, silent as he dug the grave with his bare hands. His grief was raw, tearing at her heart. When he finally sank to his knees, exhausted, Hermione knelt beside him. She did not speak, did not try to comfort him with words. Instead, she simply stayed there, shoulder to shoulder, her presence steady and unwavering. For Harry, that was enough. For Hermione, it was everything. As the days bled into weeks and their quest grew more desperate, Hermione noticed the way Harry looked at her sometimes. Quick glances when he thought she was not watching, moments where his eyes lingered longer than they should. It confused her, filled her with a dangerous, quiet hope she knew she must crush before it consumed her. Because she could not let herself believe. She could not risk everything by wishing for something Harry would never give. But the cracks in her resolve were beginning to show. The days after Dobby's death weighed heavily on them all. Shell Cottage became a fragile sanctuary, but for Hermione it was also a place of uneasy reflection. She tended her wounds quietly, grateful for Fleur's help, but her mind never stopped replaying Bellatrix's laughter, Harry's haunted expression, and the way his hand had clutched hers as though she were the only anchor he had left. At night, when the others were asleep, she would lie awake listening to the waves crashing outside. The sound should have been soothing, but instead it stirred her thoughts into chaos. Harry carried so much pain, so much responsibility, and yet she could not stop thinking of how he had looked at her in the dark corridors of Malfoy Manor, as though she mattered more than she should. One evening, Harry found her outside, sitting on the rocks overlooking the sea. She was wrapped in a shawl, her hair blown wild by the salt air. He sat down beside her in silence, and for a long time they just listened to the ocean. "You saved me," he said suddenly, his voice rough. Hermione turned, startled. "Harry, you would have done the same." "No," he interrupted, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You've saved me more times than I can count. At the manor, you didn't think about yourself. You always put me first. And I hate that." She frowned. "Why would you hate that?" "Because you deserve better," he said, finally looking at her. His eyes shone with intensity, and Hermione felt her breath catch. "You shouldn't have to carry my battles, Hermione. You've suffered because of me, over and over again." Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him that she would do it all again, 1,000 times over, but the words stuck. If she admitted too much, if she let even a hint of her feelings slip, everything would change. And she was not ready for that storm. Instead, she managed a small smile. "We chose this, Harry. All of us. You don't get to take all the blame." His gaze lingered on her a moment longer, something unspoken trembling on his lips. But then he looked away. They sat in silence again, and though Hermione kept her eyes on the waves, she could feel his closeness like a fire at her side. The fragile peace at Shell Cottage ended with Griphook's arrival and the plan to break into Gringotts. Hermione buried her feelings beneath layers of determination, throwing herself into the details of polyjuice potion and disguises. But even as she worked, she caught Harry's eyes flicking to her with a kind of quiet gratitude, a silent acknowledgement that he trusted her above all. The break-in was chaos, everything spiraling far more quickly than any of them anticipated. Hermione, disguised as Bellatrix, kept her voice steady even when terror clawed at her chest. She felt Harry's presence at her side, steadying her without words, as though the two of them moved in unspoken harmony. By the time they escaped on the dragon's back, soaring above the city, Hermione's heart was pounding with exhilaration and fear. The wind whipped her hair, and she glanced at Harry, who was clinging tightly, his eyes shining with a wild determination. For one terrifying, wonderful moment, she thought he looked like someone who belonged to her. When they landed, bruised and breathless, Harry grabbed her hand without thinking, pulling her into the cover of the trees. His fingers lingered on hers a heartbeat too long before he released her. The warmth of his touch stayed with her long after. That night, while Ron rambled about the madness of their escape, Hermione sat quietly, her thoughts a storm. She could no longer deny it. The cracks in her resolve were spreading wider. Every glance, every touch, every word Harry spoke to her chipped away at the wall she had built around her heart. She knew she had to stay silent. Harry belonged to Ginny, and nothing could change that. But as the shadows of war closed in around them, Hermione began to fear something more than Voldemort himself. She feared that, when the final battle came, she might not be able to keep her feelings hidden any longer. The days that followed their escape from Gringotts were among the most difficult Hermione could remember. They were exhausted, hungry, and constantly on the move, but Harry's determination never wavered. Hermione followed his lead faithfully, though inside she felt more fragile than ever. Every glance at him stirred feelings she tried desperately to bury. When Harry spoke of the visions that came from Voldemort's mind, Hermione listened with steady patience. She noticed how he clenched his jaw, how shadows grew beneath his eyes, and she wanted nothing more than to ease his burden. Yet she forced herself to keep a careful distance, to hide the way her heart ached whenever he looked at her for reassurance. It was in the quiet moments, when Ron drifted off to sleep, that Hermione struggled most. She would sit across from Harry by the dying embers of their fire, his face half illuminated by the flickering light, and wonder how much longer she could pretend. She told herself again and again that Ginny was the one he loved, that her own feelings were nothing but a dangerous distraction. Still, the words never quite convinced her. One night, as they camped near a forest clearing, Harry broke the silence. "Hermione," he said softly, his eyes fixed on the flames. "If I don't make it—" "Don't!" She cut him off sharply, her voice trembling. "Don't even say that." But he went on. "If I don't, you and Ron have to go on. You'll know what to do. You've always known. I trust you more than anyone, Hermione." Her chest tightened at his words. She wanted to shout at him, to tell him that he couldn't leave her, that the thought of a world without him was unbearable. Instead, she whispered, "You'll make it. You have to." He looked at her then, really looked, and the intensity of his gaze left her breathless. For a moment, she thought he might reach out, that he might say something he had never dared to before. But Ron stirred in his sleep, and the spell broke. Harry turned back to the fire, and Hermione bit her lip so hard it nearly bled. The following days brought them to Hogsmeade, where Aberforth provided shelter and news. Stepping into the shadow of Hogwarts filled Hermione with a flood of emotions, fear, determination, and something like hope. The final battle was approaching, and she knew there would be no hiding from what lay ahead. As they made their way into the castle, Hermione could feel the weight of history pressing down on her. Students and teachers alike looked to Harry with awe and expectation, but Hermione could see the doubt in his eyes. She stayed close to him, offering quiet reassurances when no one else could hear. In the room of requirement, as they gathered allies, Hermione caught Harry's eye across the crowd. For an instant, it felt as though the noise around them faded, and only the two of them existed. She wanted to walk over, to take his hand, to tell him the truth she had buried for so long. But Ginny appeared at Harry's side, her expression fierce and determined, and Hermione's heart clenched painfully. She turned away before anyone could see. That night, while preparing for battle, Hermione stood at one of the castle's windows, staring out at the darkened grounds. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the warmth of the torches. Footsteps approached, and she didn't need to turn to know it was Harry. "Scared?" he asked quietly. "Terrified," she admitted. "But that doesn't matter. What matters is finishing this." He gave a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You've always been braver than you think." Hermione swallowed hard. "So have you." For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken words. Hermione felt the urge rise inside her like a tide. Tell him now before it's too late. But before she could, Neville called out Harry's name, and the moment shattered. Hermione turned back to the window as Harry walked away, her heart aching. She knew the battle would begin soon, and she feared that, if she lost him, her feelings would remain a secret forever. And yet, deep inside, she also knew that if the chance came, she might not be able to keep them hidden any longer. The castle seemed to pulse with life as the battle loomed closer. Students, professors, and members of the Order of the Phoenix prepared in every corner, their voices blending into a determined hum. Hermione moved among them, offering advice, lending spells, and quietly strengthening wards. Yet even as she worked, her eyes strayed to Harry. He was everywhere at once, giving courage with his presence, though she could see the weight he carried pressing him down. She remembered his words by the fire, his desperate insistence that she could carry on without him. She hated that thought more than anything, and the fear of losing him gnawed at her more deeply than the fear of the battle itself. Ron came up behind her, whispering, "Are you ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be," she answered, clutching her wand tighter than she realized. Ron's expression was grave, but he nodded firmly. For once, he didn't notice the way her gaze flicked immediately to Harry. When Voldemort's forces arrived, the castle's protective charms flared, and the night erupted with shouts, spells, and fire. Hermione fought alongside her friends, her mind sharp and steady even as chaos broke around them. She blasted curses, shielded students, and pulled injured allies out of the path of destruction. Yet no matter where she was, she always searched the battlefield for Harry. At one point she saw him dueling Death Eaters at the far end of the corridor, his movements swift and precise, his face set in grim determination. Their eyes met for an instant across the distance, and in that moment Hermione felt a surge of fierce courage. She fought harder, as if the strength of her heart alone might shield him. The castle shook as giants roared and spells shattered stone. Hermione found herself separated from Ron and Harry, cornered by two Death Eaters in a ruined classroom. Her pulse raced, but her training and instinct took over. She stunned one, shielded against a hex, and disarmed the other with such force that his wand splintered. Breathing hard, she pressed her back to the wall, realizing how close she had come to falling. The thought of dying without telling Harry the truth left her trembling. She forced herself onward, weaving back into the fray, until she caught sight of Harry and Ron again. Relief swept over her, though she saw immediately that Harry's face was pale and stricken. He had disappeared suddenly before, and when he returned, his eyes held the shadow of some terrible decision. Hermione knew something had changed, though she didn't yet understand what. When Harry slipped away again, Hermione's chest tightened with dread. She wanted to chase after him, to demand answers, to stop him from walking into whatever fate he was choosing. But the battle pulled at her from every side, and she had no choice but to keep fighting. The hours blurred into a storm of light, fire, and blood. Screams echoed through the halls, and the sight of fallen friends weighed heavily on her. Yet she fought on, driven by duty, and by the desperate hope of seeing Harry alive again. At last, a hush fell over the battlefield when Voldemort's voice rang through the night. His cruel proclamation carried over the grounds, demanding Harry Potter's surrender. Hermione's stomach dropped. She knew where Harry had gone. She knew what he intended. Tears stung her eyes as the truth struck her with brutal force. He meant to sacrifice himself. She wanted to run after him, to drag him back, to scream at him for daring to leave them. But her legs felt heavy, her throat closed, and all she could do was stand there, her heart breaking. Ron beside her looked equally stunned, but it was Hermione whose chest burned with unbearable grief. Because she realized now, in the face of losing him, that no matter how hard she had tried to suppress it, her love for Harry was the strongest, truest thing she had ever known. And she might never have the chance to tell him. Hermione stood frozen as Voldemort's words faded into the night. The battlefield seemed to hold its breath, the broken stones and smoldering fires suddenly meaningless in the face of what was about to happen. Harry was gone. He had gone to face death, and every instinct in her screamed that she had to follow. Ron placed a hand on her arm, his voice raw. "He's really doing it, isn't he? He's going to give himself up." Hermione's throat tightened. She could barely speak. "Yes. He thinks it's the only way." Ron swore under his breath, but Hermione was already turning away, her steps pulling her toward the doors. Every part of her body ached to run after Harry, to find him before it was too late. Yet a part of her mind, the logical, disciplined side that had guided her through countless dangers, whispered that she might only ruin his plan if she followed. Harry had made this choice for all of them. Still, her heart refused to accept it. She pressed a hand to the stone wall, steadying herself. The image of him walking alone into the forest burned in her mind. Her chest ached with a mixture of fury and grief. How could he do this without even letting her say goodbye? How could he carry this burden alone when she wanted nothing more than to share it with him? The sounds of the battle outside resumed faintly, as if the castle itself urged her not to falter. She forced herself to return to the survivors gathered in the great hall. Faces lined with fear and exhaustion looked to her for strength, and though she felt hollow inside, she gave what she could. She tended the wounded, conjured water, whispered words of reassurance, all the while her mind screaming Harry's name. Time lost its meaning. Then suddenly, the doors burst open and silence spread through the hall. Figures emerged, Death Eaters. And with them, in Hagrid's arms, was Harry. Hermione's world shattered. She didn't hear Hagrid's broken cries or Voldemort's triumphant words. All she could see was Harry's still form, his glasses askew, his face pale, his body limp. A choked sound tore from her throat, and she covered her mouth with trembling fingers. The room spun. It couldn't be real. It couldn't be Harry lying lifeless before them. Ron's hand gripped hers, anchoring her, but nothing could stop the flood of despair crashing through her. Her knees nearly buckled, and only sheer force of will kept her standing. She wanted to scream, to run to him, to throw herself at his side. Instead she stood frozen, her heart breaking into pieces too sharp to bear. Around her, others cried out, Ginny's sobs, Neville's shocked gasp, McGonagall's anguished cry. But Hermione barely registered any of it. Her entire being was fixed on Harry. She thought of the countless moments they had shared, late nights in the library, whispered plans by firelight, the warmth of his smile when he thought no one was watching. And now it was all gone. Her love for him, unspoken, unrevealed, pressed against her chest until she could hardly breathe. She wanted to tell him, even now, that she loved him more than her own life. But her chance was gone, stolen by fate. Voldemort's voice rang out, gloating, demanding their surrender. Hermione's fury sparked through her grief, a fire that threatened to consume her. If Harry had given his life for them, then she would not let it be in vain. She stood taller, wand trembling in her hand, ready to fight until her last breath. Yet in the corner of her mind, a fragile, desperate hope whispered. Harry had always found a way before. Could it be possible that even now, even in death, he had a plan? The battle roared back to life as Neville drew the sword of Gryffindor and struck down Nagini. Spells lit the night once more, and Hermione fought with a ferocity she had never known. Every curse she cast, every shield she raised, was for Harry, for the boy she loved, for the boy she had lost. And then, impossibly, Harry moved. From the ground, from death itself, he rose. The gasp that left Hermione's lips was half sob, half prayer. Her heart leapt so violently she thought it might burst. She didn't understand how it was possible, but she didn't care. All that mattered was that Harry lived. Hope surged through the defenders as the battle reached its climax. Hermione, tears blurring her vision, fought with renewed strength. She would not let this moment slip away. She would not waste the chance Harry had given them all. And as she watched him stride forward to face Voldemort, alive, defiant, radiant with the courage she had always seen in him, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. When this was over, if they survived, she would finally tell Harry the truth. The great hall trembled with the fury of spells colliding, voices shouting, and stone cracking under the weight of the battle. Yet for Hermione, the chaos faded into the background. Her eyes were fixed on one figure, the boy who had risen from death itself, who now walked forward with a calm, steady determination that made her chest ache. Harry! Voldemort's snarl echoed across the chamber, his pale face twisted in disbelief and rage. You should be dead. But Harry only stood taller, his green eyes shining with something Voldemort would never understand. You were wrong, he said, his voice carrying over the din, and it's over. Hermione's grip on her wand was so tight her knuckles whitened. She wanted to run to him, to shield him, to fight at his side. But she knew this duel wasn't hers. This was Harry's battle, the culmination of everything he had endured, and all she could do was stand ready, her heart hammering with every second. The Death Eaters faltered as whispers swept through them. They had seen him fall. They had believed the Dark Lord's triumph. Now doubt gnawed at them, and Hermione caught the glimmers of fear in their eyes. Harry and Voldemort began to circle each other, the air thick with tension. Hermione barely dared to breathe. Every detail seared itself into her mind. The way Harry's shoulders squared despite exhaustion, the flicker of his wand, the steady rhythm of his steps. She could feel the weight of destiny pressing down on both of them. Their voices clashed as much as their magic. Harry spoke of Snape's true loyalty, of the Elder Wand's allegiance, of the fatal flaw in Voldemort's endless quest for power. The truth sliced through the air like a blade, each word tearing at Voldemort's certainty. Hermione's heart pounded with pride. Harry wasn't just fighting with magic. He was fighting with truth, with the very essence of who he was. Voldemort raised his wand with a hiss of fury. The words Hermione dreaded, feared more than anything, filled the great hall. Avada Kedavra! And at the same instant, Harry's voice rang out, clear and resolute. Expelliarmus! The spells collided. A burst of light blazed between them, dazzling and blinding. Hermione shielded her eyes, her heart racing wildly, terror and hope battling within her. She felt the floor tremble, the very air crackle with power. For a moment, time itself seemed to hang suspended. Then it was over. The Elder Wand spun from Voldemort's hand, arcing through the air like a falling star. It landed neatly in Harry's grasp. Voldemort's curse rebounded upon him, and with a final, piercing cry, the Dark Lord fell. Silence! For the first time in years, silence reigned. Hermione's knees weakened with the force of relief crashing through her. Her wand clattered to the floor as tears streamed down her cheeks. Harry stood alive, victorious, the Elder Wand in his hand. Her heart surged with such fierce love and pride that it nearly broke her in two. The hall erupted in cheers, sobs, and cries of joy. Students, teachers, and fighters surged forward, embracing, collapsing, clinging to one another. Hermione stayed where she was, her eyes locked on Harry as though he might vanish if she looked away. Ron reached her side breathless, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. He did it. Bloody hell, he actually did it. Hermione could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. She wanted to run to Harry, to hold him, to never let go. But he was surrounded, pulled into a tide of grateful hands and relieved faces. She stood back, watching, her heart both soaring and aching. Harry's gaze found hers through the crowd. For a heartbeat, the world disappeared. He smiled, exhausted, weary but alive. And Hermione's breath caught. That single smile carried more than words ever could. The battle was over. Voldemort was gone. But as the survivors gathered the wounded, as the reality of victory settled over them like a fragile dawn, Hermione knew their journey wasn't truly finished. Harry bore scars that ran deeper than any wound, and so did she. Yet one thing had changed forever. She would not waste another moment hiding how she felt. She would not let fear or doubt steal her chance again. As dawn crept over the ruins of Hogwarts, Hermione stood silently among the survivors, her mind already resolved. When the dust settled, when they were alone, she would tell Harry everything. The sun rose slowly over the battered castle, its golden rays cutting through the smoke and ruin. For the first time in years, there was no shadow looming over Hogwarts, no dread pressing on their chests. Voldemort was gone. Yet as Hermione stepped carefully over broken stone and scattered debris, she felt the weight of loss heavy in her heart. Everywhere she turned, survivors clung to one another, grieving and rejoicing in equal measure. The bodies of the fallen were gathered with reverence, their faces pale but peaceful now that the war was finally over. Hermione's chest tightened as she saw Fred lying still among the Weasleys. The sight of Ron kneeling beside his brother, his face streaked with tears, nearly broke her. She longed to comfort him, but she knew her presence would mean little compared to his family's embrace. Instead, she turned her gaze back to Harry. He was moving quietly through the wreckage, speaking with those who reached for him, his voice low and weary. Hermione could see the exhaustion etched into his every step, the shadow of pain in his eyes. Yet still he carried himself with a strength that made her heart ache with pride. For hours she watched him, helping where she could, healing minor wounds, and consoling the grieving. She longed for a moment with him alone, but he was constantly surrounded. It seemed everyone needed him, needed to see him, to touch him, to know that he was truly alive. At last, when the crowd began to thin and the morning stretched into midday, Hermione found him sitting on the broken steps outside the castle. His head was bowed, his glasses askew, and the Elder Wand rested across his knees. He looked so utterly human in that moment, so fragile, that Hermione's heart nearly burst. Quietly, she approached and sat beside him. For a long while they said nothing. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was soft, filled with the simple comfort of being together after everything. "You're alive," she whispered at last, her voice trembling. Harry glanced at her, the corner of his mouth lifting in a tired smile. "Yeah, I am." Tears burned Hermione's eyes, but she blinked them back. She had promised herself she wouldn't waste another moment. "Harry," she began, her throat tight, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said a long time ago." Harry's brows furrowed slightly, but he turned toward her, giving her his full attention. The green of his eyes caught the sunlight, and Hermione's resolve nearly crumbled. "I don't just care about you as a friend," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I never have." She faltered, fear clawing at her chest, but she pressed on. "I love you. I've loved you for a long time. And I couldn't stand another second of hiding it." The words hung in the air, raw and trembling. Hermione's heart pounded, and she braced herself for rejection, for silence, for anything that would crush the fragile hope blooming inside her. For a moment, Harry only stared at her, stunned. Then, slowly, a look of understanding softened his features. He reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on her lap. The warmth of his touch sent shivers up her arm. "Hermione," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "All this time, I thought I was alone in feeling that way. I didn't want to risk losing you." Her breath caught. You feel the same?" Harry nodded, his hand tightening around hers. "I do. I think I always have." Relief and joy flooded Hermione so swiftly she couldn't stop the tears spilling down her cheeks. Harry brushed them away gently with his thumb, his own eyes shining with unshed emotion. In that broken, blood-stained courtyard, surrounded by rubble and loss, they leaned into each other, not with the desperation of battle, but with the quiet certainty of love long denied. Their foreheads touched, and Hermione let out a shaky laugh through her tears. "We've wasted so much time." Harry's lips curved into a faint smile. "We've got plenty ahead of us." The castle lay in ruins, the future uncertain, but in that moment, none of it mattered. For the first time, they weren't just fighting to survive, they were choosing each other. And that choice would shape everything that came next. The days following the battle blurred into one another. The castle grounds became both a sanctuary and a graveyard, filled with grieving families and weary survivors who clung to the ruins as though leaving would mean forgetting. Hermione moved through it all with Harry at her side, their newfound closeness both comforting and bewildering. She still found herself startled by how naturally his hand would brush hers, or how their eyes lingered too long in moments of silence. At first, they didn't speak of what had passed between them on the steps. There were too many urgent matters at hand. Students needed food and shelter, parents searched for their children, and teachers struggled to impose order amidst chaos. Yet Hermione felt the change in every shared glance, every unspoken word. Something had shifted, and though they hadn't named it aloud again, it was there, waiting. On the third morning, after another long night helping the injured in what remained of the great hall, Harry pulled her aside. He looked exhausted, his skin pale, but there was determination in his eyes. "Walk with me," he asked. Hermione nodded, and together they slipped out into the courtyard. The stones were still blackened from curses, and the air smelled faintly of smoke, but wildflowers had already begun to push up through cracks, stubborn against destruction. Hermione couldn't help but see it as a symbol of what lay ahead. They walked in silence until Harry finally stopped near the lake, the water calm and glittering in the morning light. For a long moment, he simply stared at the horizon, as if gathering his thoughts. Then he turned to her. "Hermione, when you said you loved me, I don't think I've stopped thinking about it since." Her breath caught. She opened her mouth, but he continued, his voice low and steady. "I meant what I said. I love you too. And I don't want us to pretend it was just the heat of the moment, or because of the battle. I don't want to go back to being afraid of saying it." Hermione's chest tightened. She had feared that once the dust settled, he might doubt his feelings. Hearing him speak so clearly sent warmth flooding through her. "I don't want to go back either," she whispered. Harry reached for her hand, his fingers curling around hers with a gentleness that made her heart ache. "We don't know what comes next. The world's a mess, Voldemort's gone but his followers aren't, and I'm tired, Hermione. So tired. But I know I don't want to face it alone. I want to face it with you. Her eyes blurred with tears, but this time they were born of joy, not sorrow. She squeezed his hand tightly. Then you won't have to. Not ever again. For a while, they simply stood there by the lake, the quiet lapping of the water around them. Hermione felt the weight of years of battles, secrets, and fear slowly begin to lift. With Harry beside her, the future no longer seemed impossible. Later, as they made their way back toward the castle, they found Ron emerging from the great hall. His eyes were bloodshot from crying, his shoulders hunched beneath invisible weight. He looked between them, his gaze lingering on their joined hands. For a moment, Hermione's breath caught, fearing anger or resentment. But Ron only sighed, his voice rough. I wondered if I was imagining things. Hermione opened her mouth to speak, but Harry beat her to it. Ron, it's all right, Ron interrupted, though his tone was heavy. I'm not ready to think about anything but Fred right now. Or what's left of my family. Hermione's heart clenched at his words. She wanted to comfort him, but she knew better than to push. Ron had always been stubborn, and grief was something no spell could ease. We're here for you, she said softly. He gave a small, tired nod, then walked past them toward the courtyard, leaving them in silence once more. Hermione felt the ache of his pain but also knew that in time he would understand. That night, as the survivors gathered in what little remained of the Great Hall, a sense of unity began to bloom. Plans for rebuilding were whispered. Professors spoke of returning students safely to their families, and the ministry sent word that the trials of Death Eaters would soon begin. The world was moving forward, however slowly. Hermione sat beside Harry, their shoulders touching, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to hope. The battle had ended. The war was over. And though scars would remain, so too would the promise of healing. She glanced at Harry, who was speaking quietly with Kingsley Shacklebolt. His face was still weary, but there was light in his eyes now, something she hadn't seen in years. Hermione smiled to herself. Whatever came next, be it trials, rebuilding, or the painful work of healing, they would face it together. The war had taken so much, but it had also given them clarity. And Hermione knew with certainty that her love for Harry was no longer a secret hidden in the shadows of fear. It was real, and it was theirs, and it would carry them into the uncertain days ahead. The following days brought a strange rhythm to life at Hogwarts. Though the castle lay in ruins, its halls still bustled with survivors, Aurors, and families who came searching for loved ones. Every morning, Hermione awoke with a sense of heaviness, but also with Harry's presence close by, a comfort she had never known she needed so badly. They did not hide their closeness. Hermione walked with her hand brushing his, sat with him during meals, and often leaned against him in the evenings when exhaustion overtook her. Most people were too caught up in their own grief and relief to pay much attention, but whispers did start to spread. A few younger students gave them knowing looks, and Luna offered one of her dreamy smiles when she saw them together. It was Ron who remained the most complicated presence between them. He didn't avoid them, but neither did he seek their company as much as he once had. Hermione longed to bridge the gap, but she knew his wounds were too fresh. Losing Fred had cut him deeper than words could touch. She noticed, however, that whenever Harry spoke to him gently, Ron listened. That gave her hope. One afternoon, while repairing a shattered section of the library, Hermione found herself lost in thought. Her wand flicked automatically, mending broken shelves, while her mind spun with questions about the future. Would she return to Hogwarts to complete her final year? Should she pursue work at the ministry to help rebuild the magical world? Could she even think of those things while everything around her still felt so fragile? Harry appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with his usual quiet presence. She turned, and her heart lifted at the sight of him. He smiled faintly. You never stop, do you? He asked, walking over. Someone has to put things back together, she replied, brushing dust from her robes. Harry joined her at the broken shelf, pulling his wand from his pocket. Then you won't be doing it alone. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, repairing wood and glass. Every so often, their hands brushed, sending a thrill through her despite the ordinary nature of the task. Hermione thought of how much she had yearned for this, for him, without ever daring to believe it could happen. When the shelf finally stood tall again, Hermione lowered her wand. Harry, have you thought about what's next for you? His expression grew thoughtful. Honestly, not really. For the first time in years, I don't have to plan for the next fight. I just want to live. Maybe help rebuild, spend time with people who matter. His gaze softened on her. With you. Her chest tightened. And if I go back to finish school, then I'll be here when you're done. He said it so simply, so surely, that Hermione felt tears prick her eyes. Later that evening, the three of them, Harry, Hermione, and Ron, sat together by the fireplace in what remained of the Gryffindor common room. The atmosphere was quieter than in the days of their youth, but for the first time since Fred's death, Ron actually looked like he might smile. He glanced between them, his eyes lingering again on their closeness. Finally, he let out a long breath. So, it's the two of you now? Hermione's heart pounded. She opened her mouth, but Harry spoke first. Yeah, it is. Ron looked at the fire for a long moment. Then he gave a small shrug. Figures. You've been looking at each other like lost puppies for years. Guess I was too thick to notice. Hermione blinked in surprise. Ron. He shook his head, his tone softer than she expected. Don't worry. I'm not angry. Just things are different now. I'll get used to it. I want you both to be happy. Merlin knows we've earned at least that much. Relief washed over Hermione. She reached across and squeezed his hand, gratitude shining in her eyes. Ron squeezed back, and though there was still sadness between them, she knew this was the beginning of healing. As the fire crackled, Harry leaned against her shoulder, and Ron leaned back in his chair. For the first time since the war had ended, Hermione felt a true sense of peace settle over them. The Golden Trio had been scarred and forever changed, but they were still together. And that, more than anything, gave her hope that the future could be bright. The days at Hogwarts slowly shifted from frantic recovery to steady rebuilding. The chaos of immediate aftermath lessened, but the reality of what lay ahead grew clearer. The castle was scarred, families were fractured, and the wizarding world faced an uncertain future. Yet amidst the rubble, small moments of light appeared, and Harry and Hermione found themselves clinging to those whenever they could. One crisp morning, Hermione stood by the lake with her arms folded, watching the sunlight ripple across the water. She had not been there since before the battle, and the memories hit her with a strange intensity. Moments of studying under the tree, late-night talks, laughter drifting across the grounds. She closed her eyes, letting the wind brush against her face. You look like you're thinking about something important, came Harry's voice. She turned, smiling faintly as he joined her. Always, she admitted. This place feels different now, but also the same. I keep thinking about everything we lost, and everything we still have. Harry stood beside her, his gaze on the water. We survived, he said quietly. Sometimes I still don't believe it. Hermione slipped her hand into his, their fingers intertwining. You survived. That's what matters most to me. He looked at her then, his green eyes steady, and for a moment Hermione felt that all the chaos of the world faded away. It was just them, alive, together, and beginning something entirely new. Later that day, Hermione found herself called into a meeting with Professor McGonagall, Kingsley Shacklebolt, and several Aurors. Harry, of course, was already there when she entered, and she felt a pang of nerves at the seriousness in the room. Kingsley, now acting Minister for Magic, cleared his throat. We've begun the trials for Death Eaters captured during the battle. There are still pockets of resistance. Some are attempting to regroup. His eyes flicked to Harry. Your name is already a rallying cry, for better or worse. We'll need you to stand with us, at least for the first stage of rebuilding. Hermione's instinct was immediate. He deserves peace, she said firmly. Harry has carried the weight of this war long enough. Harry reached for her hand beneath the table, giving it a squeeze. It's all right, Hermione. He's right. If my voice can help make sure things don't fall apart again, then I'll do it. But I won't do it alone. Hermione met his gaze, recognizing his unspoken meaning. Then you won't, she whispered. McGonagall leaned forward, her eyes softer than usual. Miss Granger, you've always had a gift for leadership. The Ministry could use your wisdom. And Hogwarts too, should you choose to return. The weight of choice pressed down on Hermione, but for the first time, she did not feel overwhelmed. Instead, she glanced at Harry and felt clarity. Whatever path they chose, they would choose together. That evening, after the meeting, the two of them slipped away from the bustle and found themselves in the astronomy tower. The night sky glittered above, clear and infinite. Hermione leaned against the cold stone, shivering slightly as the breeze brushed past, until Harry wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "I don't know what's ahead," Harry admitted, his voice low. "The Ministry, the trials, rebuilding, it feels like another battle, just a different kind." Hermione rested her head against him. "Then we face it like we always have. Together." He tilted his head toward her, and this time she closed the space between them without hesitation. Their lips met softly, not with desperation but with certainty. It was the beginning of something unspoken, something they had both been waiting for without ever realizing it. When they pulled apart, Hermione laughed quietly, a sound that felt foreign after so much sorrow. "I never thought I'd find happiness in the middle of ruins." Harry smiled, brushing his thumb across her hand. Sometimes ruins are just the beginning of something stronger. Below them, the castle continued to stir with life, the wounded world slowly stitching itself back together. And above, the stars burned with quiet promise, reminding them both that the darkest nights still ended in dawn. The following days at Hogwarts felt quieter, though tension still lingered in the air. Students who had stayed returned slowly to their routines, while professors worked tirelessly to restore order. The Great Hall was repaired enough to hold meals again, and laughter sometimes echoed across the tables, hesitant but real. Harry and Hermione often sat together, and though their closeness had deepened after their night on the astronomy tower, they tried not to draw attention. The two of them had learned long ago that privacy was rare, and they treasured what little they had. One morning, over breakfast, Hermione was reading the Daily Prophet while Harry poked half-heartedly at his toast. The headline made her pause. "Trials begin for Death Eaters. Public demands justice." She frowned. "It's already started." Harry glanced at the article. Kingsley wasn't exaggerating. "They're moving quickly." He lowered his voice. "Do you think it'll really be justice? Or just punishment?" Hermione folded the paper carefully, thinking. "That depends on who takes charge of the process. Some people will want revenge. Others will want fairness. It will be messy either way." Before Harry could respond, Ginny slid into the seat across from them, her expression unreadable. "You two seem awfully busy these days," she said, her tone edged with curiosity. Hermione straightened slightly, caught off guard. "We've been helping Professor McGonagall and Kingsley where we can," she explained quickly. Ginny's gaze flicked between them. Harry shifted uncomfortably, but before he could say anything, Neville joined their table with a warm grin, easing the tension. "Have you heard?" Neville asked excitedly. "They're offering positions to some of us in the new Auror training program, even without finishing school." Harry perked up at that. "Really?" Neville nodded. "Kingsley wants to rebuild quickly. He says people with real battle experience are needed." Hermione frowned, her protective instincts flaring. "That sounds reckless. You're all still so young," she caught herself, realizing she sounded like McGonagall and sighed. "But I suppose the world doesn't wait for us to grow up." That afternoon, Harry and Hermione were summoned to the Ministry for their first official involvement. The atrium, once shattered, had been restored with gleaming marble, though the faint scars of battle were still visible. People stared as they walked through, whispering, bowing slightly to Harry. He hated the attention, but Hermione's steady presence kept him grounded. In the Wisengamot chambers, they sat beside Kingsley as the first trial began. Lucius Malfoy stood before the court, his pale face lined with exhaustion. His wife, Narcissa, sat in the gallery, clutching Draco's hand. The proceedings were tense, accusations flying, testimonies laid out. Harry and Hermione were asked to speak, and the weight of it settled heavily on them both. When Harry took the stand, silence fell. He cleared his throat, his voice steady but quiet. "Lucius Malfoy did terrible things. He supported Voldemort. But I can't forget that his wife, his family, saved my life in the end. Without Narcissa Malfoy, I wouldn't be standing here." The room erupted in murmurs. Hermione's heart swelled with pride at his fairness. He was not blinded by anger, even after everything. When her turn came, Hermione spoke with clarity. "We cannot rebuild this world on vengeance alone. If we condemn every single person without considering their actions as individuals, then we become no better than what we fought against." Justice must mean more than punishment. Her words carried across the chamber, and Kingsley gave her a subtle nod of approval. By the time the trial adjourned, the air in the ministry was buzzing. Harry and Hermione stepped outside into the cool evening, the weight of the day pressing heavily on their shoulders. "That was harder than I thought," Harry admitted. Hermione slipped her hand into his. "It will only get harder. But you did the right thing today." He looked at her, gratitude shining in his eyes. "I don't think I could do any of this without you." She smiled softly, squeezing his hand. "Then it's good you'll never have to." As they walked away from the ministry, the setting sun painted the sky in streaks of gold and crimson. Ahead of them stretched trials, politics, and endless challenges, but side by side, they felt ready to face whatever came next. The days following the Malfoy trial set the tone for what the Wisengamot would become. Some saw the decision as too lenient, others as the first step toward true justice. The public was divided, but Kingsley pressed forward, determined to shape a fairer system. For Harry and Hermione, involvement in these trials brought both responsibility and strain. Back at Hogwarts, the atmosphere remained uneasy. The Great Hall bustled with students, but every conversation seemed to return to the same topics: arrests, trials, punishments. Hermione noticed how quickly gossip spread. Every rumor carried weight, and misinformation ran rampant. She often stayed up late in the library, writing letters to Kingsley, suggesting policies to keep proceedings transparent and just. Harry, meanwhile, found himself torn. Part of him wanted to leave the politics behind, to join the Aurors and fight what remained of Voldemort's supporters. Another part of him feared being consumed by that same cycle of violence. Each time he felt overwhelmed, he found himself seeking Hermione's company, grounding himself in her steady voice and quiet conviction. One evening, while the common room buzzed with chatter, Harry slipped away with Hermione to the courtyard. The moon was high, its pale light spilling across the stone walls. They sat together on a bench, the night cool and calm. "Do you ever think about what life might have been like if none of this happened?" Harry asked suddenly. His gaze drifted to the sky. Hermione tilted her head. "Sometimes. But imagining it feels almost impossible. So much of who we are was shaped by this war. Without it, I don't know who we'd be." Harry gave a small laugh, though it held no humor. "Maybe we'd just be students. Worrying about exams, sneaking into Hogsmeade, complaining about Snape." Hermione smiled faintly. "That does sound nice." She grew quiet, then added softly, "But then I think about all the people we've lost, and I can't help but believe we owe it to them to make things better. That's what keeps me going." Harry looked at her, his chest tightening with emotion. "That's what keeps me going too." Their eyes lingered on each other a little too long before Hermione looked away, her cheeks warming. She tucked a curl of hair behind her ear, suddenly flustered by the intensity of the moment. Harry shifted slightly closer, the unspoken words between them hanging in the air. Before either could say more, footsteps echoed in the courtyard. They turned to see Ginny approaching, her expression unreadable. "I thought I'd find you here," Ginny said, her voice calm but edged with something Hermione couldn't quite place. Harry straightened awkwardly. "Ginny, hi. We were just talking." Ginny's eyes flicked between them, lingering on their joined hands resting on the bench before Hermione quickly withdrew hers. "Of course," Ginny said, her tone clipped. "You're always talking these days." An uncomfortable silence followed. Hermione rose to her feet, forcing a polite smile. "I should head back to the library. Good night." She brushed past Ginny gently, disappearing through the archway. Ginny sat down where Hermione had been, facing Harry. For a moment she said nothing, her expression shadowed by the moonlight. Finally she asked, "Harry, what's happening between you and her?" Harry hesitated, his throat tight. He had always cared deeply for Ginny, but the bond he shared with Hermione was different, stronger, steadier, woven from years of shared battles and unspoken understanding. "I don't know," Harry admitted honestly. "But I know I need her. I always have." Ginny's face hardened, but her eyes shimmered with hurt. She stood abruptly, her voice quiet. "Then maybe you've already made your choice." Without another word, she walked away, leaving Harry alone in the courtyard. The night felt heavier after she left. Harry leaned back against the bench, his thoughts tangled. He had never wanted to hurt Ginny, but denying his feelings for Hermione no longer seemed possible. When he finally returned to the Gryffindor Tower, Hermione was still awake in the common room, books spread across the table. She looked up as he entered, her eyes searching his face. "Everything all right?" she asked gently. Harry nodded, though his chest ached. "It will be, as long as you're here." Hermione's gaze softened, and though she didn't press him further, she closed her book and sat beside him. Neither spoke again, but the silence between them was warm, filled with unspoken understanding. For Harry, that was enough for now. The morning after Ginny's confrontation lingered in Harry's thoughts like a storm cloud that refused to drift away. He barely touched his breakfast, ignoring the lively chatter in the great hall. Hermione noticed the faraway look in his eyes and quietly slid a plate of toast in front of him. "You'll need energy if you're going to keep up with everything today," she said, her tone practical, but her gaze filled with concern. Harry managed a faint smile. "Thanks. I'm fine." Hermione frowned, unconvinced, but she didn't press him. She knew Harry well enough to realize he would speak when he was ready. Across the table, Ron was noisily retelling a story about Quidditch practice to anyone who would listen. Ginny sat nearby, pretending to follow along, but her eyes never once strayed toward Harry. That silence between them spoke volumes, and it twisted Harry's insides with guilt. Later that day, Professor McGonagall summoned Harry and Hermione to her office. The stern headmistress paced in front of her desk, a letter clutched in her hand. "We've received troubling reports," McGonagall began, her voice grave. "It seems remnants of the Death Eaters are reorganizing in secret. Several small villages have reported suspicious activity. Strangers in masks, magical disturbances, unexplained disappearances." Hermione leaned forward. "Do we know who's leading them?" "Not yet," McGonagall said. "But the Ministry fears that without Voldemort, others will attempt to seize power. Kingsley is spreading Aurors thin, trying to track them all." She hesitated before fixing her sharp gaze on Harry. "You and Miss Granger have become deeply involved in political matters. I worry this will draw their attention." Harry straightened. "I'm not going to sit back if they're hurting people." Hermione nodded firmly. "Neither am I." McGonagall's lips thinned. "I suspected as much. But you must tread carefully. Hogwarts should remain a place of learning, not a battleground." When they left the office, Harry's jaw was set. "It's starting again. We didn't finish it, Hermione. Voldemort may be gone, but his shadow isn't." Hermione touched his arm lightly. "Then we'll face it. Together." Her words steadied him more than she realized. That evening, Harry and Hermione met in the library, spreading parchment across the table as they discussed strategies. Hermione had already started mapping out potential patterns of attacks based on the reports she'd read. Harry studied the map with admiration, amazed by the clarity of her thinking. "You always see things I miss," Harry said quietly. Hermione flushed slightly. "We make a good team. We always have." Before Harry could respond, the door to the library creaked open. Ginny stepped inside, her expression cool but her eyes betraying something softer. She walked up to their table, her gaze flicking between the two of them. "Kingsley sent word," Ginny said briskly, setting a folded parchment on the table. "He wants you both to attend the next Wisengamot session. It seems you've made yourselves rather indispensable." Hermione took the parchment, scanning it quickly. "Thank you, Ginny." Ginny nodded, but her eyes lingered on Harry. For a moment, it seemed as if she might say something more, but she turned on her heel and left, her footsteps echoing through the quiet hall. Harry sighed, rubbing his forehead. "She's not going to forgive me, is she?" Hermione hesitated, then said softly, "She's hurt. She cared for you deeply. That kind of wound takes time." Harry looked at her, conflicted. "I never wanted to hurt her. But what I feel for you, it's different, Hermione. It's not something I can ignore anymore." Hermione froze, her quills slipping from her fingers. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had never let herself consider the possibility that Harry might feel the same way she did. Yet here he was, voicing it openly. "Harry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This isn't simple. There's so much at stake right now. With Ginny, with the Ministry, with everything. If we what?" Harry pressed gently, his green eyes locking with hers. "If we admit what's between us? Hermione, I don't care how complicated it is. I can't keep pretending." Hermione's breath caught, and for a long moment she said nothing. She wanted to tell him she felt the same, that she had for longer than she dared admit. But before she could, the library doors burst open again. Neville rushed inside, his face pale. "Harry, Hermione, come quick. Something's happening on the grounds. You need to see this." They jumped to their feet, parchment scattering across the floor. Following Neville out of the castle, they reached the courtyard, where dozens of students stood clustered, pointing toward the forbidden forest. Dark green sparks glowed in the night sky, followed by the faint outline of a skull with a serpent tongue, the dark mark. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Harry's blood ran cold. It was back. Hermione gripped his arm tightly, her voice steady even as fear flickered in her eyes. "They're making their move." Harry's jaw clenched. "Then so will we." The dark mark shimmered above the forbidden forest, its eerie glow casting sickly green light across the grounds. Students gasped, some screaming, while others clutched each other in fear. McGonagall stormed into the courtyard with several professors behind her, her wand raised as she barked orders. "Back inside, all of you. Immediately," she commanded. The prefects hurried to corral the students, but Harry, Hermione, and Neville held their ground. McGonagall's sharp eyes fell on them. "You three inside as well. This is no time for heroics." Harry shook his head. "Professor, if Death Eaters are out there, do not argue with me, Potter." McGonagall snapped. "The safety of the school is my first priority." Hermione tugged on Harry's sleeve. "She's right. We can't rush into this without knowing what we're facing." But Harry's gaze stayed fixed on the forest. "I can feel it, Hermione. They're sending a message. And it's for me." Neville swallowed hard. If the Death Eaters are regrouping, why attack near Hogwarts? Unless they wanted everyone to see. McGonagall ushered the last students inside before turning back to the three of them. Her face was grim, her voice low. "The Aurors have already been notified. Until they arrive, no one leaves the castle grounds. Am I clear?" "Yes, Professor," Hermione said quickly, tugging Harry away before he could protest again. That night, the castle buzzed with whispers. Some younger students were terrified, while older ones speculated about the return of Voldemort himself. The atmosphere was heavy with dread. Harry paced their shared common room with Hermione, his fists clenching. "This is just like before," Harry muttered. "The fear, the panic, it's exactly what they want." Hermione, sitting cross-legged on the sofa, studied him. "They're trying to draw you out. That's why the mark was near the forest. They knew you'd see it." "Then it worked," Harry said darkly. "Because I'm not going to let them terrorize people again." Hermione stood and crossed to him, her hand brushing against his arm. "Harry, listen to me. Charging after them isn't the answer. We need to think, to plan. Otherwise we're just playing their game." Her words cooled his anger, though the fire inside him still burned. He looked into her eyes, finding steadiness there. "You always know how to stop me from doing something reckless." Hermione gave a small smile. "Not always. But I'll keep trying." The next morning, Hogwarts was swarming with Aurors. Kingsley himself arrived, his presence commanding as he questioned professors and surveyed the forest's edge. Harry and Hermione were called to meet him privately in McGonagall's office. Kingsley set a report on the desk. The dark mark was cast, but no bodies were found. No signs of struggle, no evidence left behind. Whoever did this wanted attention, not casualties. "That's worse," Harry said. "It means they're planning something bigger." Hermione nodded. "They're testing how we'll respond. They want to know who's still loyal and who will resist." Kingsley leaned forward. "Which is why I'll need your help. The Wisengamot meets again in 2 days, and this will dominate the session. We must be prepared to act. Harry, Hermione, you've both become symbols. Your voices carry weight. Are you ready for that responsibility?" Harry and Hermione exchanged a glance. She gave a subtle nod, and Harry answered firmly. "We're ready." Later, walking through the corridors, the two of them spoke in hushed tones. "If they're regrouping," Hermione whispered, "they'll need a leader. Someone to rally them. Who do you think it is?" Harry's brow furrowed. "I don't know. But whoever it is, they're dangerous enough to make the mark shine again." As they turned the corner, Ginny appeared, her expression unreadable. She had overheard their last words. "So it begins again," she said quietly. Her eyes flicked to Harry, then Hermione. "And I suppose you'll be at the center of it." Harry opened his mouth to respond, but Ginny's gaze lingered on Hermione for just a moment too long before she walked away. Hermione exhaled slowly, tension rippling between them. Harry, we're not just fighting Death Eaters this time. We're fighting shadows from our past. And if we're not careful, they'll tear us apart before we even face them. Harry reached for her hand without thinking, his voice steady. Then we hold on. No matter what. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the castle, as if the sky itself knew that another war was beginning. The ministry atrium was filled with uneasy chatter. Witches and wizards gathered in clusters before the great golden fountain. The Wisengamot was convening in the highest chamber, and the air carried the weight of anticipation. Rumors of the Dark Mark's reappearance had already spread through every corner of wizarding society, and fear was returning like a creeping fog. Harry stood beside Hermione outside the chamber doors, his hands shoved into his robes to hide his restless energy. He hated waiting, hated standing still when the threat felt so close. Hermione touched his arm. Remember, this isn't just about what we've seen. It's about what people believe. If the wizarding world panics, that's exactly what the Death Eaters want. Harry gave her a tight nod. You're better at this than I am. Hermione smiled faintly. Maybe. But they'll listen to you. They always have. The chamber doors opened with a creak, and the two of them stepped inside. The circular room was already half full, rows of high-backed seats occupied by wizened witches, stern-faced wizards, and a few officials scribbling notes. Kingsley stood at the center dais, commanding the room with his calm authority. Order, he called, his deep voice carrying easily. We convene today not in panic, but in purpose. A symbol of terror has reappeared in our skies. We must decide how to respond. Murmurs rose from the benches. Some voices demanded swift action, arrests, raids. Others insisted it was a hoax, an attempt to stir chaos where none existed. Perhaps, an older wizard sneered, this is merely another excuse to keep Potter at the center of everything. Must we again live in his shadow? Harry stiffened, but Hermione spoke before he could. Her voice rang clear, cutting through the noise. With respect, this isn't about Harry. It's about the safety of everyone here. Symbols like the Dark Mark are not cast by children playing pranks. They are cast by people who seek to revive fear, to test our defenses. Her words commanded attention. She stood straighter, her eyes fierce. We cannot afford division now. The last war showed us what happens when we ignore the signs. Families were torn apart. Children grew up in hiding. Do you truly wish to repeat that mistake? The chamber fell silent for a moment, and all eyes turned to her. Harry stepped forward then, his voice steady but edged with fire. When Voldemort fell, I thought it was over. We all did. But evil doesn't die, it waits. It hides until we grow complacent. And now it's resurfacing. If we stand here and argue, we'll lose before we've even begun. A witch in emerald robes leaned forward. And what do you propose, Potter? Harry glanced at Hermione, then back at the chamber. We fight it before it grows. We protect the innocent. And we show them, whoever they are, that we are not afraid. The chamber buzzed again, louder this time. Some nodded in agreement, others muttered dissent. Kingsley raised his hand for silence. Thank you, Mr. Potter. Miss Granger. His eyes swept across the chamber. I move that we establish a special task force. One that answers directly to this body, led by myself, with Potter and Granger as advisors. We will investigate, we will prepare, and if the threat proves real, we will be ready. The motion passed, though not without muttered resistance. As the chamber emptied, Harry and Hermione walked out together, both exhausted from the weight of so many eyes. That was, Harry began. Terrifying, Hermione finished, exhaling shakily. But necessary. They walked through the ministry halls in silence until they reached the lifts. Just as the doors slid open, a hooded figure brushed past them, slipping a folded note into Harry's hand so quickly he almost missed it. He froze, heart hammering, and opened the parchment. The handwriting was jagged, unmistakably rushed. The Dark Lord is gone, but his heir walks among you. The mark will rise again. Hermione's face drained of color as she read over his shoulder. Harry, what does that mean? Before he could answer, the note burst into green flames, disintegrating in his hand. They stared at each other, the words echoing in their minds. The heir of Voldemort. The ministry lifts rattled and hummed as they descended, but Harry and Hermione stood in stunned silence. The words on the parchment replayed endlessly in Harry's head. The Dark Lord is gone, but his heir walks among you. Hermione broke the silence first. We can't ignore this. Someone went to great lengths to get that message to you. And if it's true, she trailed off, visibly unsettled. An heir could mean a child, or someone chosen. Either way, it's dangerous. Harry clenched his fists. Why give us a warning, though? If this heir wants to rise to power, why not just strike? Because fear works better when it builds slowly, Hermione replied, her voice low and thoughtful. If they're trying to unsettle us, it's working. We're already on edge, and the Wisengamot is split. That's exactly the kind of division a new dark power would exploit. The lift doors opened into the bustling atrium, but both of them felt out of place in the swirl of everyday life. Witches and wizards bustled past them, carrying parchment stacks, gossiping about Quidditch matches, or calling for fireplaces in the Flu network. None of them knew the shadow that had just stretched over the wizarding world again. Let's get back to Grimmauld Place, Harry said firmly. We need privacy. The ancient Black family home was cold and dim when they arrived, its walls heavy with secrets. Creature shuffled by muttering about traitors and intruders, but Harry ignored him. In the kitchen, he spread a roll of parchment on the table. We'll need to approach this logically, Hermione said, already digging into her enchanted bag for quills and notes. If Voldemort had a child, we'd have heard rumors. His followers might have kept such a secret hidden, but someone would have known. And if it's not a blood heir, it could be someone groomed to take his place. Harry thought of Bellatrix, of the fanatic loyalty she had shown Voldemort. He remembered the stories whispered about her devotion. What if it's someone from his closest circle? Someone they kept hidden during the war? Hermione nodded grimly. That's possible. And we'll need to check the records, birth registries, hidden wards, maybe even Azkaban files. If an heir exists, the Ministry won't admit it publicly. Not until they're forced to. Before Harry could respond, the fire in the hearth roared to life. Green flames licked the stone, and Kingsley's head appeared in the blaze. His expression was grave. Potter. Granger. I've just received word. There's been another mark. This time over a Muggle hospital in Manchester. No casualties, but the message is clear. They're escalating. Harry's stomach dropped. And the Wisengamot? Still arguing, Kingsley said darkly. Some are convinced it's a plot to discredit the Ministry. Others are demanding I round up every former Death Eater immediately. We're stretched thin, and the panic is spreading faster than the truth. Hermione leaned closer to the fire. Kingsley, someone passed Harry a message at the Ministry. It said Voldemort's heir is among us. The parchment destroyed itself before we could show anyone. For a moment, the minister's calm broke, his eyes narrowing with concern. If that's true, we're dealing with more than rogue fanatics. Keep this quiet. Trust no one but each other. If there is an heir, then every move we make will be watched. The flames died away, leaving the kitchen dim and heavy with unspoken dread. Harry ran a hand through his hair. If there really is an heir, then everything we fought for could come undone. Hermione set her quill down with a determined snap. Then we'll find them before they find us. That night, as the house creaked and groaned in the silence, Harry dreamed restlessly. He saw a shadowed figure standing in the ruins of Hogwarts, a wand raised high. Around the figure, masked Death Eaters knelt, chanting in whispers. The figure lowered their hood, and though the face was blurred, Harry felt an icy chill settle into his bones. Whoever they were, they carried Voldemort's legacy like a second skin. Far away, in a hidden chamber beneath an abandoned manor, a gathering of robed figures surrounded a long, black stone table. At the head sat a young figure cloaked in silver and black, their eyes glinting like cold steel. The Death Eaters bowed low, their voices hushed. "My father is gone," the figure said, their tone calm but filled with venom. "But his vision is not. I am his heir. And soon, the world will remember the name of Voldemort." Morning light crept through the grimy curtains of Grimmauld Place, but Harry had barely slept. His mind churned with the dream, with the warning, with Kingsley's words. When Hermione came down to the kitchen, she looked just as worn, her hair pulled into a messy knot, ink stains on her fingers from late-night note-taking. She dropped a stack of parchment onto the table. I've started a list of possible suspects. Anyone tied closely enough to Voldemort that they might have hidden a child or successor. Harry leaned forward. Names were scribbled in her neat handwriting: Bellatrix Lestrange, Narcissa Malfoy, Barty Crouch Jr., though dead, Rodolphus Lestrange, and even some names Harry hadn't heard before, lesser-known Death Eaters who had gone underground after the war. Bellatrix makes the most sense, Harry said grimly. She was obsessed with him. If anyone bore an heir, it would have been her. Hermione nodded. But Bellatrix died in the Battle of Hogwarts. If she had a child, someone else must have raised them in secret. That would explain why no one's seen them before. Harry's stomach twisted. That would mean they've been raised their whole life to believe in Voldemort's cause. They wouldn't need to be convinced, they'd already be loyal. The flue crackled again, startling them both. This time, it wasn't Kingsley, but Neville's head that appeared. His round face was tense, eyes darting. Harry, Hermione, you need to come to Hogwarts. Now. Something's happened. The urgency in Neville's voice left no room for hesitation. Within minutes, they were stepping out of the green flames into the headmistress's office. Minerva McGonagall stood stiffly by the window, her expression grave. Neville stood beside her, his hands clenched at his sides. What's going on? Harry asked immediately. McGonagall turned, her face pale with fury. Last night, someone broke into the castle. No students were harmed, thank heavens, but the intruder left something on the wall of the Great Hall. A message. Hermione's voice dropped. What kind of message? McGonagall's lips pressed thin. The same words you described to Kingsley, Miss Granger. The Dark Lord is gone, but his heir walks among you. It was written in flames. Every portrait and ghost in the castle saw it. The words hit Harry like a punch. So it's not just warnings anymore. They're announcing themselves. Neville's face was hard. The students are scared, Harry. Parents are already writing to take their children home. It feels like the beginning all over again. Hermione's hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. They want to recreate Voldemort's rise, slowly, with fear, with doubt. Whoever this heir is, they're not hiding anymore. They're laying the groundwork. Harry turned toward the window, staring out over the familiar towers and courtyards of Hogwarts. This was where Voldemort had fallen. The heir choosing to start their campaign here wasn't just strategy, it was symbolism. They're challenging us, Harry muttered. And they know we'll answer. That night, while Hogwarts whispered with rumor and fear, the cloaked figure in the abandoned manor lit a single candle on the black stone table. Their followers knelt before them, silent, waiting. The message has been delivered, one whispered. The heir leaned forward, their eyes gleaming with cruel delight. Good. Let them fear. Let them search. Every move they make will bring them closer to despair. And when the world cries out for a new leader, I will rise to claim what is rightfully mine. They extinguished the candle with a flick of their wand, plunging the chamber into darkness. Harry and Hermione lingered in the great hall long after the students had been ushered back to their dormitories. The words, burned into the stone by magical fire, had finally vanished, but the echo of their meaning clung to the walls. Harry stood where the letters had been, fists tightening and loosening at his sides. They want us rattled, he muttered, his voice low. They want us running in circles while they gain strength. Hermione stood beside him, her eyes scanning the stones as if she could still see the fiery words. Then we don't give them that advantage. We start digging. We trace every Death Eater connection, every disappearance after the war. If there's an heir, there has to be a trail. Harry turned toward her, his jaw set. The Ministry's records are a mess after the war. Half of them were destroyed, the other half deliberately altered by Death Eater sympathizers. We'll have to get into the restricted archives if we want the truth. Hermione gave him a look. Then we'll get in. One way or another. The following day, they were at the Ministry. Kingsley allowed them into the secure levels beneath the Department of Mysteries, where ancient files and sealed records were stored. Dust coated the shelves, and the air was heavy with spells meant to discourage prying eyes. Hermione pulled a file box forward, coughing at the dust. Look for records of wards placed over children after the war. Protection charms. Anything that might suggest a child hidden under an assumed identity. Harry opened another box, scanning the yellowed parchments. He froze as a name leapt out at him. Here. Look at this. Rodolphus Lestrange petitioned for access to the child registry after the Battle of Hogwarts. Denied, of course. But why would he be looking unless? Unless there was a child, Hermione finished. Her eyes flickered with unease. And if Bellatrix was the mother, Rodolphus would have claimed guardianship after her death. Harry's blood ran cold. That means he might have raised them. In secret. Before they could continue, Kingsley entered, his face grim. We've had another incident. Knockturn Alley. A group of masked figures attacked a shop and left the same message. The Aurors barely drove them off. Harry exchanged a dark look with Hermione. So it's not just talk anymore. They're building an army. Kingsley nodded. And if what you found is true, we're not facing an imitator. We're facing blood. That night, Harry lay awake in Grimmauld Place, staring at the ceiling. His scar didn't burn, but a pressure built behind his eyes, a faint whisper of something old and dark. He sat up, sweat slick on his skin. In the silence, a voice echoed inside his mind. Cold, mocking. You hunt me, Harry Potter. But I know you better than you know yourself. And when the time comes, you will kneel. Harry's hands clenched the blanket, heart pounding. The voice faded, leaving only the sound of his breathing in the dark. Somewhere, far from London, the air smiled in the shadows. The connection had worked. The boy who lived had heard them. The next morning, Harry told Hermione everything. They were seated at the long wooden table in Grimmauld Place, a pile of parchment and ministry files spread between them, untouched mugs of tea growing cold. You heard them in your head, Hermione repeated, her brow furrowed. Like you used to hear Voldemort? Harry nodded, jaw tight. It wasn't exactly the same. With Voldemort, it was like I was inside his mind sometimes. This felt different. Like they were speaking through me. Testing it. Hermione pressed her hand to her forehead. If that's true, it confirms it. Blood ties. That kind of link doesn't happen randomly. It means they're connected to Voldemort directly. Maybe even closer than we feared. Harry stared at her. Then there's one person who might know. Rodolphus Lestrange. Hermione's expression hardened. Azkaban. 2 days later, cloaked against the freezing sea winds, they stood before the iron gates of the prison. The Dementors no longer guarded it, since Kingsley had banished them, but Azkaban itself remained an oppressive, lifeless place. Its gray stone towers jutted from the waves like teeth, the cries of imprisoned men echoing faintly through the wind. An Auror led them down twisting corridors until they reached a cell at the far end. Inside, Rodolphus Lestrange sat hunched on a bench, his once sharp features now sunken, his hair wild and gray. His eyes, however, still gleamed with malice as they flicked up at Harry and Hermione. Well, he rasped, his voice like rusted iron, the savior and his shadow. Come to gloat. Harry stepped forward, refusing to flinch. We came for answers. About Bellatrix. The name struck a nerve. Rodolphus stiffened, then let out a laugh, though it was hollow. She was magnificent. Fire and fury. You wouldn't understand. Hermione's voice cut like a blade. We understand enough. Did she have a child? Rodolphus went very still. His gaze darted between them, then he leaned forward, chains clinking. Why ask now after so long? Unless, he grinned, teeth yellow. Unless the child has come home to roost. Harry's patience snapped. Tell me the truth, or so help me. But Rodolphus barked a laugh. Threats from you, Potter? How noble. But the truth, yes, the truth will keep you up at night. Bellatrix was carrying when she went to fight your mudblood friend in the Department of Mysteries. She hid it well. No one knew but me. And when the Dark Lord fell, she gave birth in secret. Hermione's breath caught. Where? Rodolphus leaned back, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. You think I'll hand over my blood so easily? That child is the last spark of her brilliance. My legacy. My revenge. Harry stepped closer to the bars. You don't get it, do you? That child, your so-called legacy, is threatening innocent lives. They're picking up where Voldemort left off. You put them on this path. Rodolphus tilted his head, smiling faintly. Good. Then they are exactly what I hoped. Hermione's fists clenched, her voice trembling with fury. You're a monster. The Auror pulled them back, warning that time was up. Rodolphus only laughed again, his voice echoing down the corridor as they left. You can't stop blood, Potter. Blood always wins. Back outside, The icy wind whipped against them. Hermione pulled her cloak tight, eyes clouded. So it's true. The air is real. Harry's jaw tightened as he stared at the crashing waves beyond the prison. And now we know, they're not just Voldemort's heir. They're Bellatrix's child, which means they were raised to hate everything we stand for. Hermione's hand touched his arm. Then we don't just have to fight them. We have to understand them. Because if we don't, they'll destroy everything. Harry looked out across the sea, the echo of the heir's voice still lingering in his mind. A storm was coming, and it was only just beginning. The days after their visit to Azkaban were restless ones. Harry and Hermione barely slept, their minds turning endlessly over Rodolphus's words. A child raised in secrecy. A child born from Bellatrix Lestrange. Hermione spent every waking moment buried in records. She filled the kitchen table at Grimmauld Place with ministry documents, adoption registries, and confidential files she had gained through her position. Ink smudged her fingers, and parchment scraps piled in untidy stacks. Harry watched her work with a mix of admiration and worry. She had thrown herself into this, as if solving it would mend the fractures of the past. One night, Harry set down a plate of toast next to her. "You need to eat," he said softly. Hermione barely looked up. "I think I've found something." Harry leaned over. On the parchment was a name circled 3 times, Helena Rowell. "Rowell," Harry muttered. "As in?" "Yes," Hermione replied. "Thorfinn Rowell. Death Eater. He vanished around the time Bellatrix would have given birth. According to the ministry, he had no children. But look at this." She pushed another file across. "There's a record of a baby girl taken in by a cousin of Rowell's, but the details were buried, changed deliberately. They moved her from one foster home to another across Europe. It's as if someone wanted her hidden, but not lost." Harry's stomach twisted. "Hidden from us. Or from Voldemort's enemies," Hermione added grimly. "If Bellatrix thought the Dark Lord might return, she may have wanted the child shielded until the right moment." That night, Harry dreamed again. The heir's voice echoed in his head, low and venomous. "You can chase shadows, Potter, but you'll never catch me. Blood runs deeper than justice, deeper than your feeble hope." He woke in a cold sweat, his scar prickling faintly. The following morning, Hermione announced she had traced Helena Rowell to a small village in northern France. It was remote, surrounded by dark forests and rivers, far from wizarding centers. They left at once. The journey was tense, their thoughts heavy with anticipation. When they arrived, the village was eerily quiet. Half the homes were abandoned, ivy choking the stone walls. The locals avoided eye contact, muttering in hushed tones. It felt like a place that had been touched by fear. Harry and Hermione went to the last known address from the files. The house was small, wooden shutters drawn tight. As they approached, the door creaked open. An elderly woman stepped out, her back bent, her face lined with years of secrets. "I knew one day someone would come asking," she said in French. Hermione translated quickly. "You knew Bellatrix's child," Hermione said carefully. The woman nodded, eyes clouded with something between sorrow and dread. "Helena. She was different. Dark eyes that saw too much. She spoke of shadows before she could even walk." Her voice lowered. "And then one night she was gone. A man came for her. He said he would take her to where she belonged. I never saw her again." Harry's heart pounded. "Do you know who he was?" The woman hesitated, then whispered. "A man with pale hair. Cruel eyes. He bore the mark." Hermione's breath caught. It must have been a Death Eater. Maybe Rowell himself. But Harry wasn't so sure. Something in the description tugged at him. Pale hair. Cruel eyes. There had been many like that, but his gut told him this wasn't random. They thanked the woman and left, but unease gnawed at both of them. As they walked back through the village, the air grew colder. Harry's scar flared again, and a voice whispered so clearly he froze. "You're too late, Potter. You'll always be too late." The shadows of the trees stretched unnaturally long across the path. Hermione grabbed his arm, her wand already raised. The wind howled, and then it came, an explosion of dark magic, a curse hurled from the woods. They dove aside as the ground split where they had stood. Figures emerged from the trees, masked and cloaked. Their movements were precise, disciplined. Not the scattered remnants of Death Eaters, these were soldiers. At their head was a young witch with striking black hair and eyes that burned with cruel intelligence. She lowered her wand, lips curling into a smile. "Harry Potter," she said, her voice smooth mocking. "And the ever-loyal Hermione Granger." How predictable. Harry felt his blood run cold. He knew without asking. This was her. The heir. Bellatrix's child. Hermione's grip on her wand tightened. "Helena Rowell," she said. The young witch's smile widened. "No, that was the name of a shadow. My true name is Belladonna, daughter of Bellatrix, heir of the Dark Lord. And I have come to finish what they began." The silence between them cracked like glass as the masked figures closed in. The forest pressed heavy around them, the smell of damp moss and ash mixing with the electric thrum of magic in the air. Harry raised his wand, his heart pounding against his ribs. Hermione stepped beside him, her eyes locked on Belladonna. "You don't have to do this," Hermione said firmly, her voice carrying through the stillness. "You don't have to follow the same path your mother did." Belladonna tilted her head, her expression amused. "How quaint. You think I have a choice in this? My blood demands it. My mother's legacy is mine to carry, and I will not dishonor it by bowing to the world you've built from ashes." "You mean the world she tried to burn down," Harry shot back. "The same world Voldemort tried to destroy. You don't know what you're dealing with. That path only ends in death." Belladonna's smirk deepened. "Death is not an end, Potter. It's a door. My mother taught me that in whispers before I could even understand words. And now I will show you the truth." She flicked her wand, and her followers surged forward. Spells cut through the air in streaks of green and red. Harry shouted a shield charm, blocking the first wave. Hermione countered with a stunning spell that dropped one of the cloaked figures instantly. The clearing erupted into chaos. Harry dueled two at once, deflecting curses that scorched the trees and sent sparks exploding across the ground. His mind flashed back to the Battle of Hogwarts. Except this time, there were no allies at his back, only Hermione. Hermione fought with her usual precision, her spells sharp and decisive. She conjured a wall of fire that split the attackers, forcing them into smaller groups. But Belladonna moved through it all untouched, weaving around flames as if they'd been away from her. Her wand danced in her hand. Every curse she cast filled with a venomous elegance that reminded Harry too much of Bellatrix herself. "You fight like her," Harry muttered, blocking a vicious hex. Belladonna's laughter rang out, high and sharp. "I am her. Improved." With a sharp movement, she hurled a spell directly at Hermione. Harry barely had time to throw himself in front of it. The curse slammed into his shield, shattering it into shards of light that cut his skin. He staggered back, wand gripped tight, breath ragged. "You're weaker than the stories," Belladonna sneered. The boy who lived groaned soft in his peace. Harry forced himself upright, his scar throbbing. "You want to test that? Fine." He aimed directly at her. Expelliarmus. The spell shot across the clearing, but Belladonna sidestepped effortlessly, sending back a curse so dark the ground hissed and blackened where it struck. Hermione countered with a slicing charm, which Belladonna deflected, the rebound exploding a tree trunk behind them. The fight was too close. Harry could feel it. She was powerful, far more than she should have been at her age. Suddenly, one of her followers shouted in alarm. Blue sparks lit the sky, ministry wards activating in the distance. Reinforcements were coming. Belladonna's expression hardened. She raised her hand, signaling her soldiers to retreat. "You're lucky tonight," she said coolly, her eyes fixed on Harry. "But your luck always runs out. When it does, Potter, I'll be there to end you. And Granger too." Her gaze flicked over Hermione with a dangerous glint. "The world will tremble again, and this time no prophecy will save you." With a crack of magic, she and her followers disapparated into the shadows, leaving the forest silent but scarred. Harry lowered his wand, his chest heaving. The ground around them was scorched, trees splintered, the air still humming with the echo of curses. Hermione's hand was trembling when she grabbed his arm. "She's stronger than we thought." "Too strong." Harry nodded grimly. His scar still burned faintly, and in the echo of the forest, he swore he could hear Bellatrix's laugh overlapping with her daughter's. "She's not just her mother's daughter," Harry said, voice low. "She's something worse. And she won't stop until we stop her." The Ministry wizards arrived minutes later, but there was nothing left for them to find. Only the ruin of another battle, and the rising certainty that the war they thought had ended was only changing faces. Belladonna reappeared with a sharp crack of magic, her boots hitting the floor of a dimly lit chamber. The air was thick with the smell of damp stone and candle smoke. Her followers appeared one by one around her, some clutching burns and cuts from the fight, others panting from exhaustion. None of them spoke. They waited, heads bowed, as Belladonna strode to the center of the room, her cloak trailing like a shadow. The candles flickered as if drawn toward her presence. Her face was calm, but her grip on her wand was tight, her knuckles pale. "He is not the boy from the stories," she said finally, her voice sharp as glass. "He is older, slower. But make no mistake, Harry Potter is still dangerous." One of the followers shifted uneasily. "Mistress, the Ministry will be searching after tonight. It may not be safe to continue." Belladonna's wand flicked faster than a blink. A streak of red light struck the man, and he collapsed unconscious on the floor. The silence that followed was suffocating. "Do you doubt me?" she asked softly, stepping closer to the others. "Do you think my mother's blood runs thin in me? That I cannot finish what she began?" Her eyes burned, the candlelight catching the dangerous gleam in them. The others bowed their heads lower, murmuring apologies. Satisfied, Belladonna turned away. She walked to the far end of the chamber, where a blackened tapestry hung. It was ancient, torn in places, the threads depicting twisted shapes of serpents and skulls. She touched it with her hand, her fingers lingering on a faded crest. "My mother taught me that power is not given," she whispered, almost to herself. "It is taken." The world thought her gone, her flame extinguished. "But I am here. I am her echo, and I will make the world remember." Her gaze snapped back to her followers. "We will not hide. We will strike harder. Every scar Potter bears will be my gift. Every fear the Ministry feels will be my triumph. And when the wizarding world trembles again, they will not speak of Voldemort, nor of Bellatrix. They will speak of me." The room filled with murmurs of agreement, though tinged with fear. One of the women stepped forward cautiously. "Mistress, you speak of power. But how do we match the numbers the Ministry commands?" "The Aurors." "Numbers mean nothing," Belladonna cut her off. "What matters is fear. A single spark can ignite a forest. My mother taught me that too." She smiled, slow and dangerous. "And tonight I plant the fire." From a hidden alcove, she drew out a chest bound with iron clasps. Her followers leaned forward, their breaths quickening. She opened it with a hiss of dark magic, and inside lay a swirling mass of shadow, bound by runes that pulsed faintly red. The room chilled instantly, frost creeping along the stones. "This," Belladonna said reverently, "is what she left me. A fragment of her will, a gift sealed before the Battle of Hogwarts. The world feared Bellatrix Lestrange once. Soon, they will fear her daughter twice as much." Her followers gasped, some recoiling at the dark magic that bled from the chest. Belladonna only smiled wider, her hand caressing the swirling shadow as though it were alive. "Tonight was only a test," she continued. "Potter and his mudblood companion survived, yes. But they saw me. They know I exist. And fear begins with knowledge. Soon, their nights will be haunted. Their allies will fall one by one, until Harry Potter himself kneels before me." The candles guttered as her words sank into the stone. Her followers bowed low, their voices rising in a chant of devotion. Belladonna closed the chest slowly, the lock snapping shut with a sound that echoed through the chamber like a heartbeat. "Prepare yourselves," she commanded. "The world thinks the war ended years ago. Let us remind them how easily it can begin again." Her laughter filled the chamber, sharp and cruel, carrying the unmistakable echo of Bellatrix Lestrange. The sound of crunching leaves and the faint shimmer of dawn marked Harry and Hermione's weary journey back from the forest. The battle lingered on them like smoke, burns on their robes, dust in their hair, and the lingering sting of adrenaline that hadn't quite faded. Neither spoke for a long while, though the silence between them carried more weight than words. When the outline of the burrow appeared in the distance, Hermione slowed. "Harry," she said carefully, her voice hoarse from the spells she had shouted hours earlier. "This isn't something we can sit on. We need to take it straight to Kingsley. Now." Harry nodded, his jaw tight. "I know. If Belladonna's building something, the Ministry has to be ready. But," He stopped, exhaling heavily. Hermione, she looked at me like she knew me. Like she'd been waiting for this. Hermione's expression darkened. She's Bellatrix's daughter. Of course she's been waiting. Hatred like that doesn't die, it festers. But the real danger isn't her fixation on you. It's what she does with it. Inside the burrow, they were met with chaos. Molly gasped at the state of them, immediately fussing over Hermione's scorched sleeve and Harry's bloodied knuckles. Ginny appeared at the bottom of the stairs, her eyes wide with fear that quickly hardened into anger. What happened? Ginny demanded. Harry glanced at Hermione before answering. It was her. Bellatrix's daughter. She's calling herself Belladonna. The room went utterly still. Ginny's fists clenched. You're joking. I wish I were, Harry said quietly. She's not hiding anymore. She has followers, and she's dangerous. More dangerous than any Death Eater we've faced since the war. Molly pressed a hand to her mouth, her face pale. Arthur, who had been silent until now, spoke with grim weight. Then the Ministry must be warned at once. If she has Bellatrix's cunning and Voldemort's ambition. He trailed off, but his meaning was clear. Later that morning, Harry and Hermione stood in the tall, polished halls of the Ministry of Magic. Kingsley Shacklebolt greeted them in his office, his usually calm expression shifting as he listened to every detail of the night. You're certain? Kingsley asked, his deep voice slow but edged with urgency. Bellatrix's daughter. Yes, Hermione said firmly. There's no doubt. She even spoke of her mother. She sees herself as a continuation of Bellatrix's legacy. And she's not working alone. Kingsley's brow furrowed. We had whispers about dark gatherings, but nothing concrete. This changes everything. Harry leaned forward. She had something with her. A chest. I don't know what was inside, but it was powerful. Dark. She claimed it was left to her by Bellatrix. For the first time, Kingsley's composure cracked. If Bellatrix prepared something before the Battle of Hogwarts, Merlin, help us. He turned to a stack of parchments, summoning an aide with a flick of his wand. We need intelligence. Every unspeakable, every Auror, every informant in Nocturne Alley. This becomes priority 1. Hermione's hands were clasped tightly in front of her. Kingsley, you should know. Belladonna wasn't just trying to kill us. She wanted us to see her. To know she was back. That's how it begins, Kingsley murmured. Fear first. Then chaos. Harry shifted uncomfortably. He remembered too well the way Voldemort had moved. Slow at first, whispers in the dark, until suddenly the world had been on fire. He could almost hear Belladonna's mocking laughter in the back of his mind. Ginny, who had insisted on accompanying them, spoke up sharply. So what do we do? We can't just wait for her to strike. Kingsley fixed her with a grave look. No, we prepare. We strengthen our defenses. And we hunt her before she gains momentum. Harry, though, wasn't convinced preparation would be enough. The encounter in the forest replayed again and again in his mind. The precision of her spells, the ferocity in her eyes. This wasn't a reckless zealot. Belladonna was calculating. She had a plan. As they left the Ministry later that day, Hermione walked beside him in silence. Finally, she spoke. Harry, do you feel it? That shadow. The way things felt before. When the war was just beginning. Harry didn't answer at first. He stared at the bustling Ministry atrium, witches and wizards hurrying past with briefcases and parchments, laughing, gossiping. The world looked normal. Peaceful. But beneath it, he felt it too, that slow, cold shift, like a storm gathering at the horizon. Yes, he said finally. And I think Belladonna wants us to feel it. She wants us to remember the fear. Hermione's gaze was steady. Then we can't let her control the story. This time, Harry, we fight differently. We don't wait for her to make the first move. Harry gave a small nod, though doubt gnawed at him. Fighting differently was easier said than done. Especially when their enemy already knew exactly where to strike. And far away, in her hidden lair, Belladonna traced her fingers over the runes of the iron-bound chest, whispering spells too ancient for most to recognize. Each incantation made the runes glow brighter, the shadows inside pulse stronger. She could feel her mother's magic stirring, answering her call. Soon, she thought with a cruel smile. Soon the world will see me for what I am. Not Bellatrix's daughter. Belladonna, the name they will fear. 2 nights later, the wizarding world woke to chaos. A string of explosions shook Diagon Alley just before dawn, shattering glass, toppling shop signs, and sending owls shrieking into the sky. Madame Malkin's robes hung in tatters from its blasted doorway, and flourish and blots lay in ruins, parchment and books raining like confetti over the cobblestones. But it wasn't destruction alone that chilled the witnesses. It was the symbol scorched into the stones of the alley. A jagged black flower, blooming like fire. Belladonna's mark. Harry, Hermione, and Ginny arrived within the hour, joining a squad of Aurors struggling to contain the panic. Witches and wizards crowded the street, some shouting in fear, others demanding answers. Parents clutched their children close, and the word spread like wildfire. She was real, and she was here. "Clear the crowd," an Auror barked. "This is a restricted area. Back away." Harry crouched near the charred flower etched into the stone. He touched it cautiously, feeling the residual heat still radiating from the mark. Dark magic thrummed beneath it, thick and oppressive. "She wanted everyone to see this," Hermione whispered beside him, her face pale. "She wanted to make sure no one doubted her existence." Ginny's eyes narrowed, her wand clenched tightly in her hand. "She's playing Voldemort's game all over again. Terror first, power second." But Hermione shook her head. "No. Voldemort hid in the shadows until he was ready. Belladonna is forcing herself into the light right away. She wants to be seen." Kingsley appeared through the smoke, striding forward with several senior Aurors in tow. His voice carried with commanding authority, but even he couldn't mask the edge of worry. "We'll have to issue a public statement by noon. If we don't, the prophet will spread fear faster than we can stop it." Harry rose, brushing ash from his robes. "And she'll be counting on that. The fear feeds her." Hermione's gaze swept the ruined shops, her mind working quickly. "This isn't just destruction. Look at the pattern. The blasts, 3 shops destroyed, evenly spaced across the alley. It wasn't random. It was deliberate." Kingsley's brow furrowed. "What are you saying?" "She's sending a message," Hermione replied grimly. "A warning shot. And if I'm right, this is only the beginning." That afternoon, the Ministry addressed the wizarding world. Kingsley stood at the center of the atrium, his deep voice echoing through magical broadcasting orbs. "This morning, a cowardly act of dark magic struck at the heart of our community. Let me be clear, Belladonna Lestrange will not succeed. The Ministry, with the aid of the Auror Office, is taking immediate action to protect every witch and wizard. We will find her, and we will stop her." Despite his resolute words, Harry felt the tension vibrating through the crowd. He had stood there himself once, trying to convince the wizarding world to resist Voldemort. He knew too well how fragile courage became when fear began to spread. That night, Harry, Hermione, and Ginny met again in the Burrow's kitchen. The fire crackled, though none of them touched their tea. "She's escalating quickly," Hermione said. "We can't just react to her attacks. We need to predict them." "She's clever, Harry. And calculating." Harry rubbed his temples. "We need to know what's in that chest she took. That's the key. Whatever it is, it's powerful enough to scare Kingsley. If she unlocks it," he trailed off, dread curling in his chest. Ginny leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "So we stop her before she does. Track her, corner her, finish this before she gathers more followers." Hermione's mouth tightened. "Easier said than done. She's careful. And if she's studying her mother's spells, she may know magics even Voldemort never used." Silence fell for a moment, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Harry spoke. "Then we do what we always do. We don't wait for her to strike again. We go to her." Far away, in the ruins of an abandoned castle, Belladonna sat before the iron chest, her fingers tracing the runes as if caressing them. She had watched the panic her attack sowed, had listened to the whispers spreading through the wizarding world. Fear had taken root, just as she wanted. "Mother," she murmured into the dark, "they will learn your name again through me." The chest groaned, shifting as a faint violet glow seeped through its cracks. Belladonna's smile widened. Soon, very soon, she would unleash the weapon her mother had left her, and the wizarding world would kneel. The ruins of the castle echoed with the low hum of dark enchantments as Belladonna pressed her hand flat against the chest. The violet glow seeped into her skin, curling up her arm like veins of living fire. She gritted her teeth as the magic resisted her, testing her resolve, but she did not pull away. Pain was part of the bond, Her mother had taught her that, even from beyond the grave. The runes pulsed once, then again, and with a grinding noise like stone tearing apart, one of the locks snapped free. The chest shuddered, and the glow brightened, filling the room with a terrible, hungry light. Belladonna fell back, gasping, sweat dampening her brow. She stared at the open lock and laughed, a low and feral sound. Almost there. Soon the world will see what you left for me, mother. Meanwhile, at the burrow, parchment maps and magical tracings covered the table where Harry, Hermione, and Ginny sat late into the night. The fire had burned low, throwing flickering shadows across their tired faces. Hermione tapped her wand against the map, revealing glowing dots scattered across Britain. These are the sites linked to Bellatrix. Safe houses, hideouts, even the ruins of places she fought in. I think Belladonna may be using them. Harry leaned closer, studying the map. That's too many to search one by one. She'll be moving constantly, just like Voldemort did. Ginny crossed her arms, her fiery hair catching the light. Then we narrow it down. Where would she go if she wanted power? Not just to hide, she's after something big. We've seen the mark, we've seen the chest. This isn't just about terror. She's preparing for a strike. Hermione's quill scribbled furiously across parchment. If she's unlocking that chest, she'll need specific sites to channel the magic. Ancient ones. Places already saturated with dark energy. That narrows it to here. She circled a ruined fortress in the Scottish Highlands. Harry's gut clenched. I know that place. Dumbledore told me once it was where some of the earliest Death Eaters were trained, long before the First War. It's cursed ground. Ginny's expression hardened. Then that's where we'll find her. The next morning, under cover of mist, the three of them disapparated to the highlands. Cold air bit at their skin as they stood among jagged rocks and broken towers that clawed at the sky. The place radiated unease, and Harry felt his scar prickle faintly though Voldemort was long gone. Merlin, Hermione whispered. The wards are still active. Someone's been here recently. They moved cautiously, wands raised, each step crunching over frostbitten grass. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant caw of a raven. Then, without warning, a spell streaked past Harry's shoulder, exploding against the rocks. They dove for cover as masked figures emerged from the shadows. Belladonna's followers, clad in dark robes but marked not with the skull of the Death Eaters, but the burning flower of their new mistress. Down! Harry shouted, deflecting a curse. The fight erupted instantly, green and red sparks lighting the ruins like lightning. Ginny's hex sent one follower spinning through the air, while Hermione conjured a shield large enough to block 3 curses at once. But as they fought, Harry caught sight of movement at the edge of the fortress. A figure stood tall and still, watching the battle with cold amusement. Her pale face and dark eyes gleamed in the half-light Belladonna. Their eyes locked, and Harry felt a chill unlike anything he had known since Voldemort. She raised her hand, the violet glow from the chest's magic still faintly curling across her skin. Harry Potter, she called, her voice carrying through the chaos like a spell itself. The world remembers your victory. Soon, they'll remember your defeat. Then, with a wave of her wand, she unleashed a surge of violet fire that roared across the battlefield, consuming stone, shattering shields, and forcing Harry and his friends back. By the time the flames died, Belladonna was gone. Only her laughter remained, echoing in the cursed ruins. Harry stood, his heart hammering, his robes scorched. He glanced at Hermione and Ginny, both shaken but alive. She's stronger than we thought, Hermione said hoarsely. And she's not finished unlocking that chest. Ginny clenched her fists. Next time, we don't let her escape. Harry stared into the shadows where Belladonna had vanished, a sinking feeling in his chest. He knew deep down that if they didn't stop her soon, she wouldn't just repeat her mother's legacy, she'd surpass it. The ministry atrium was buzzing with anxious voices when Harry, Hermione, and Ginny arrived. Aurors in scarlet cloaks hurried between fireplaces, parchment memos fluttered through the air like restless birds, and the tension in the room was palpable. It was as though the entire wizarding world could already feel Belladonna's shadow stretching further with each passing day. Kingsley Shacklebolt met them outside the war room, his broad shoulders set in grim determination. I heard what happened at the fortress, he said in his deep voice, ushering them inside. You're lucky you made it out alive. Harry shook his head, his jaw tight. It wasn't luck. She let us live. She wanted us to see what she's capable of. The war room itself was filled with maps charmed to display shifting dots of light across Britain, marking magical disturbances. An enormous violet streak shimmered across Scotland where Belladonna had unleashed her fire. The Aurors surrounding the table fell silent when the three of them entered, eyes turning to the man who had once ended Voldemort. Hermione wasted no time. She's unlocking something, an artifact her mother left behind. It requires multiple steps, tied to old sites of power. She already broke through the first lock. An older Auror frowned. We've heard whispers of this chest. Bellatrix was obsessed with it, but she never dared finish whatever ritual it required. She didn't dare, Hermione corrected sharply, because she lacked the knowledge to control it. But her daughter, Belladonna, has something even worse. She has patience. She's not rushing. She's learning. Ginny leaned across the table, her fiery temper sparking through. She isn't playing at being a Death Eater. She's building something new. And if we keep treating her like just another criminal, she'll catch us unprepared. Kingsley's eyes narrowed at the violet streak on the map. Where's the next site? Hermione stepped forward, laying out her research. If she follows the sequence of runic patterns etched into the chest, the next location will be the catacombs under Dover. It's one of the oldest magical burial sites in the country, layered in ancient wards. If she harnesses that power, she hesitated, the words choking her throat. She could fuel the chest enough to rip open whatever lies inside. Harry clenched his fists, images of violet fire flashing in his mind. Then we have to get there before she does. But just as resolve filled the room, a new voice cut through the tension. It was Draco Malfoy, standing in the doorway with a hood pulled low over his pale hair. The Aurors immediately drew their wands, but Kingsley raised a hand. I asked him to come, Kingsley said calmly. Malfoy has been providing intelligence on remnants of Voldemort's supporters. Draco's gaze lingered on Harry for a moment, unreadable, before he spoke. You'll never beat her if you keep chasing her like she's Voldemort. She's not him. She doesn't crave followers, she craves fear. Every time you fight her head-on, you give her what she wants. Ginny bristled, her hand tightening on her wand. And what do you suggest, Malfoy? That we sit back and let her tear Britain apart. Draco's gray eyes glinted. No. I suggest you stop thinking like Aurors and start thinking like her. She's setting a stage. And you keep playing your part. Harry studied him, torn between distrust and the uncomfortable sense that Draco wasn't wrong. Belladonna wasn't fighting to win battles. She was fighting to create an inevitability. Kingsley spoke at last, his voice low and firm. We'll prepare a strike team for Dover. If she means to use the catacombs, we'll intercept her there. Potter, Granger, Weasley, you three will lead. That night, while the ministry prepared, Belladonna stood in the center of an abandoned chapel deep in the countryside. Candles flickered in a circle around her as she traced runes across the air, the violet fire from her hand searing them into existence. The second lock had appeared, shimmering like chains across the chest. It pulsed against her magic, stronger than the first, but she only smiled. The pain of the energy gnawed at her veins, but she welcomed it, savoring it like wine. You thought you could bury this from me, Mother, she whispered, pressing her palm flat against the runes. But you should have known I'd be stronger. With a thunderous crack, the second lock shattered. The chest exhaled a plume of violet smoke, and for a heartbeat, the chapel filled with whispers. Hundreds of voices overlapping, chanting in a language Belladonna did not yet understand. Her laughter rang through the night, sharp and triumphant. Back in London, Harry jerked awake from a nightmare he couldn't shake. The whispers he'd heard in his dreams sounded far too much like the ones Belladonna had just unleashed. Something told him that whatever was inside that chest was not meant for any wizard to touch. The sea roared against the cliffs of Dover, its waves crashing like an unending drumbeat against ancient stone. The night was sharp and cold, the moon hidden behind thick clouds, and the entrance to the catacombs lay concealed behind a tangle of rock and bramble that even muggles instinctively avoided. Harry, Hermione, and Ginny arrived with a squad of Aurors, cloaks drawn tight against the wind. Each step felt heavier than the last, the air tingling with ancient wards that prickled against their skin. Harry held up his wand and whispered, Lumos, but the light seemed swallowed almost immediately by the oppressive darkness of the tunnels. Hermione was already muttering countercharms, her brow furrowed as she traced patterns in the air with her wand. "These wards are older than Hogwarts," she murmured. "Roman, maybe even older. If Belladonna taps into them, she'll have power no one alive today fully understands." "Which is why we can't let her," Ginny said, her voice fierce but tight with nerves. She glanced at Harry, eyes flashing. "We finish this tonight." The squad descended into the catacombs, boots echoing off damp stone. Narrow tunnels twisted into vast caverns where bones and urns rested undisturbed for centuries. The deeper they went, the colder it became, until their breaths clouded white in front of them. The silence pressed down like a weight. Then came the first sign, violet fire, faint at first, etched into the cracks of the walls. The flames shimmered like veins running through the stone, pulsing in time with something deeper beneath the earth. "She's already here," Harry whispered. As they pushed forward, the corridor opened into a vast chamber. At its center stood Belladonna, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders, her hands raised as runes spun wildly around her in violet light. The chest floated before her, wrapped in spectral chains that rattled and groaned as she worked to break them. Her laughter filled the cavern when she saw them. "I was wondering when you'd catch up," she purred, her voice echoing unnaturally. "Come to stop me, or to watch?" "Belladonna!" Harry shouted, stepping forward. His voice reverberated against the stone. "You don't know what you're unleashing. Stop this before it's too late." She tilted her head, her eyes gleaming like twin shards of amethyst. "Too late. You don't even know what's inside, do you? This isn't about Voldemort or Death Eaters or any of your tired wars. This is about unlocking the magic your world was too afraid to keep." Hermione tightened her grip on her wand. Afraid because it was never meant to be wielded. Magic that ancient isn't power, it's corruption. Belladonna's smile widened. "Corruption? No. Evolution." She thrust her hand toward the chest, and the chamber erupted in violet fire. The Aurors shouted incantations, shields springing up as the flames licked across the cavern. The ground trembled, bones spilling from their niches in the walls. A deafening roar shook the chamber as spectral guardians rose. Shadows of long-dead warriors armed with glowing swords, summoned by Belladonna's intrusion. Harry and Ginny leapt forward, wands flashing. Spells ricocheted across the chamber, striking down specters only for more to rise. Hermione frantically worked to unravel the runes encircling the chest, her mind racing to keep up with Belladonna's speed. "You'll never match me, Granger," Belladonna sneered, hurling a blast of violet energy that shattered a stone pillar. Dust and debris rained down, forcing Harry to dive and pull Hermione out of the way. Ginny retaliated, sending a blazing curse that knocked Belladonna back a step. But the chest groaned in response, one of its spectral chains snapping free with a sound like thunder. The whispers Harry had heard in his nightmares surged through the chamber, curling in the ears of everyone present. The Aurors faltered, clutching their heads, their shields weakening under the psychic assault. Belladonna rose to her feet again, her laughter almost drowned by the voices. "Do you hear them?" she shouted over the chaos. "They've been waiting for me." Harry forced himself to stand, wand raised, his heart pounding with dread. He shouted above the storm of whispers, his voice raw. "You don't control them, Belladonna. They control you." For the first time, her smile flickered. Just for an instant. Hermione seized the moment, slashing her wand in a desperate arc. Incarcerus. Chains of light erupted from her spell, wrapping around the chest, weaving themselves into the ancient runes. The whispers dimmed slightly, though the pressure in the air remained suffocating. Belladonna screamed in fury, the sound splitting stone. Violet fire surged around her, shattering the light chains one by one. And then the ceiling groaned. Cracks spread across the cavern roof. Bones toppled from the walls as the entire catacomb trembled violently. "Harry!" Hermione cried. "She's destabilizing the whole chamber." Belladonna raised her hands high, violet fire spiraling around her, the chest pulsing like a living heart at her feet. With a final, terrible laugh, she released her power. The cavern exploded in a storm of fire, stone, and whispers as the catacombs began to collapse. The catacombs shook violently, dust pouring from the ceiling as rocks split and fell. Harry threw himself over Hermione as boulders crashed into the ground, sparks bursting where spells collided with stone. Ginny's voice cut through the chaos as she yelled, "Protego Maxima," and a shield dome spread just in time to deflect a falling slab. Belladonna stood at the center of the chamber, her body blazing with violet fire. Her eyes glowed, her laughter echoing off the walls as if a dozen voices spoke through her at once. The chest hovered above the cracked ground, its chains snapping one by one, their rattling drowned by the deafening whispers. Hermione forced herself upright, coughing through the dust. "She's channeling the catacombs themselves. If we don't stop her now, everything down here will come alive against us." "Then we stop her," Harry said, his jaw tight. He locked eyes with Ginny, who nodded without hesitation. Together, they advanced, spells already blazing. Belladonna flicked her hand, and skeletal warriors burst from the walls, their hollow sockets glowing with violet light. Swords clashed against Auror's shields, the metallic screech ringing in Harry's ears. One Auror was struck down, his body pinned beneath rubble before he could scream. "Go!" Harry shouted at the others. "Hold them off, we'll take Belladonna." Ginny was already dueling her, sparks flying as curses and hexes lit up the chamber like lightning. Belladonna's power was raw and ferocious, bending stone and fire at her command. Every spell Ginny cast was met with an overwhelming counterstrike that sent shockwaves through the floor. Hermione, meanwhile, focused on the chest. Her wand traced frantic patterns in the air, weaving light through the broken runes Belladonna had corrupted. Her lips moved quickly, muttering incantations under her breath, sweat dripping down her temple despite the chill. Another chain snapped. The voices grew louder, so loud Harry felt them clawing at his mind. "We are waiting. We are yours." "No," Harry bellowed, shoving the whispers out of his head. He lunged at Belladonna, firing a disarming charm with all the strength he had. The spell hit her squarely, but instead of her wand flying, the violet energy around her absorbed it. She staggered but didn't fall. Instead, she smiled, her hair whipping around her face in the storm she had created. "You think you can stop me with children's spells?" she roared, thrusting her hand forward. A torrent of violet fire slammed into Harry, hurling him across the chamber. He hit the stone hard, pain tearing through his side. "Harry!" Ginny screamed, breaking formation to rush to him. Belladonna seized the moment. With a guttural cry, she wrenched her arms upward, and the final chains binding the chest shattered. The whispers became a roar, 1,000 voices crying out in triumph. The chest cracked open, light pouring from within like molten gold wrapped in shadows. Hermione screamed, "Close it! Don't let it open!" Her wand sparked violently as she hurled binding spells at the chest, but the magic repelled her like water on glass. Harry forced himself up, blood on his lip, his vision swimming. "We can't hold it back," he croaked. "We have to take her down." Ginny's eyes blazed. She raised her wand, summoning every ounce of magic within her. Then together, Harry, Ginny, and Hermione aligned, their wands raised. The air hummed with their combined power, their voices shouting as one. "Stupefy! Expulso! Confringo!" The chamber detonated with light as the spells struck Belladonna. For the first time, she screamed, not with triumph, but pain. She staggered backward, violet fire flickering as the chest's light engulfed her. But instead of falling, she thrust both hands into the open chest. The energy poured into her, merging with her body, the whispers fusing with her voice. When she lifted her head again, her eyes were no longer violet. They were a bottomless black, and her smile was sharp enough to freeze Harry's blood. The catacombs groaned with a final, earth-shattering tremor. The ceiling split open. Stone rained down in deadly chunks. "Run!" Hermione screamed, grabbing Harry's arm and dragging him toward the collapsing tunnel. Ginny was at their side instantly, pulling him along. Behind them, Belladonna's laughter rose above the roar of destruction, a sound that seemed to follow them through the choking dust and fire. The catacombs collapsed in a thunderous explosion of stone and light. And when the survivors finally staggered into the freezing night air, coughing and bloodied, the cliffs behind them were nothing but a smoking ruin. But Belladonna was nowhere to be seen. The night air bit at their skin as Harry, Hermione, and Ginny collapsed against the jagged rocks of the cliffside. Smoke poured from the ruins where the catacombs had once stood, a black column twisting into the starless sky. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sounds were their ragged breathing and the distant rumble of settling stone. Hermione clutched her ribs, her knuckles white around her wand. "She didn't die in there," she whispered. I could feel it. The magic didn't collapse with her. It moved. Ginny's face was pale, streaked with blood from a cut on her cheek. Her eyes, though, blazed with determination. "Then we'll find her again. And this time we finish it." Harry sat hunched, staring at the smoke. His body screamed with pain, but what churned inside him was worse. He had seen the way Belladonna fused with the chest, the way the voices had poured into her. He could still hear them echoing faintly in his skull, like embers smoldering. She is whatever was locked inside that chest. Voldemort's plans, his essence, his weapon. Whatever it was, it's hers now. Hermione nodded grimly. And that makes her more dangerous than Voldemort ever was. She's not just wielding dark magic, she is it. The surviving Auror stumbled toward them, battered and wounded. Two carried another between them, limp and unmoving. The sight made Harry's chest tighten. Good witches and wizards had died in those tunnels, trying to stop Belladonna. And yet she had walked away stronger. "Orders, Potter?" one Auror asked, his voice hoarse. Harry stood, forcing the pain down. "We regroup at the Ministry. We need healers, reinforcements, research. We can't go after her half-dead, and we can't afford another trap." Hermione touched his arm, her eyes sharp. "We'll need the Department of Mysteries involved. Whatever was in that chest wasn't just dark magic. It was ancient, beyond anything I've studied. They may have records." Ginny spat into the dirt. "Records won't stop her." She turned toward Harry, fire in her eyes. "Next time we face her, we go in ready to kill. No holding back. No disarming charms. You saw what she is now." Harry didn't answer. His silence spoke volumes. The group set off toward the apparition point, limping and leaning on one another. The night was eerily quiet, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Far away, deep in the heart of the ruins, a soft glow flickered to life. Belladonna rose slowly from the rubble, her body untouched by the collapse. Shadows curled around her like living serpents, sinking into her skin, feeding her. Her eyes opened, bottomless black pools that reflected nothing of the world. She looked down at her hands, flexing them as violet sparks danced across her fingers, now tinged with streaks of gold from the chest's core. A slow smile spread across her lips. "They tried to bury me," she murmured, her voice layered with the whispers of countless others. "But I am the one who digs graves." The ruined stones at her feet shifted, and skeletal remains pulled themselves from the dirt, their bones snapping into place, their empty sockets burning with violet fire. Dozens rose around her, forming a silent army, awaiting her command. Belladonna raised her hand, and the dead bowed. "The Age of Shadows begins," she whispered. Above her, thunder cracked across the night sky, though no storm had been called. And miles away, as Harry, Hermione, and Ginny apparatted into the Ministry atrium, all three of them shivered at the same moment, though none could say why. The Ministry atrium was silent when Harry, Hermione, Ginny, and the surviving Aurors appeared. It was long past midnight, the great golden fountain in the center casting flickering reflections across the polished floor. A handful of night shift officials gasped as the battered group stumbled in, robes torn and faces smeared with blood and ash. "Get healers," Harry barked, his voice sharp and commanding despite the exhaustion that dragged at him. Two officials rushed off at once, and within moments St. Mungo's meta-wizards were streaming into the atrium. Injuries were tended to with hurried spells, though Harry waved off treatment for himself until every Auror was seen to first. Hermione collapsed into one of the benches, her wand still clutched tightly in her hand, as if letting go would mean disaster. Ginny paced nearby like a caged lion, every so often muttering under her breath about Belladonna. Kingsley Shacklebolt appeared minutes later, his tall frame towering over the crowd. His eyes widened at the state of the group, but his calm demeanor did not falter. "Report," he said simply. Harry straightened, meeting the minister's gaze. "We found the catacombs. The chest was real, but we were too late. Belladonna fused with it. She's stronger than anything I've ever seen. We barely made it out alive." Kingsley's jaw tightened, but he nodded for Harry to continue. "She's not Voldemort, Kingsley," Hermione said, her voice urgent though her body trembled. "She's something worse." Whatever protections or bindings the chest had are gone. She's absorbing its magic. Hermione broke off, shaking her head. I don't know how to explain it. She's not just using magic. She is magic. Ginny stopped pacing and glared at the minister. She's raising the dead. We saw what was happening in the ruins. She has an army now, and if she decides to march, no one will stand against her. The atrium erupted with whispers, fear spreading quickly among those gathered. Kingsley raised a hand for silence. Then we act before she does. We'll convene the Waisengemot at once. Every department will be briefed. If this threat is as severe as you describe, the entire wizarding world must be warned. Harry stepped closer, lowering his voice. No, Kingsley. If we announce this openly, panic will break out. You know what happened during Voldemort's war. People will flee, hide, or worse, join her out of fear. Kingsley studied him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. You're right. We'll keep this contained until we have a strategy. In the meantime, every Auror and Unspeakable we can spare will be on alert. Hermione's head snapped up at the mention of Unspeakables. The Department of Mysteries, she said quickly. They must have records of that chest, or at least knowledge of the kind of magic bound within it. If we can understand what she's become, we may find a weakness. Kingsley turned to her. I'll arrange access. You'll work directly with them. Ginny slammed her fist against the marble wall. All the research in the world won't matter if she decides to strike tomorrow. We need fighters, Harry. We need the DA again. The word struck Harry like a spark. He saw their faces in his mind. Neville, Luna, Seamus, Cho, and so many others who had stood with him in the room of requirement years ago. They had been children then, yet they had fought with more courage than most grown wizards. Ginny's right, Harry said finally. If Belladonna's raising an army, we'll need one of our own. Not just Aurors, not just ministry officials. Ordinary witches and wizards, students, families, they'll all be targets if we don't fight back. Kingsley's expression was grim. Then start gathering them. Quietly. But understand this, Potter. This is no longer about resistance. If what you say is true, this is survival. Before Harry could respond, a sudden crack of displaced air echoed in the atrium. Every wand shot up, but instead of an attacker, a lone Unspeakable stood at the center of the fountain. His hood shadowed his face, but his voice was calm, steady. We've felt it, he said, his words carrying across the stunned crowd. The chest has been opened. Its contents are no longer bound. The balance is broken. He turned his hooded gaze toward Harry, Hermione, and Ginny. She is coming. The atrium fell into silence, and for the first time since the battle, Harry felt cold crawl down his spine. Belladonna had already made her move. Hermione was the first to sense something was wrong. She had been sitting with Ginny and Harry in one of the smaller chambers of the ministry, parchment scattered across the table as they scribbled plans of defense and contact lists of allies. Her quill stopped mid-scratch, her head snapping up toward the ceiling. Do you feel that? She asked, her voice tight. Ginny frowned. Feel what? But Harry shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His scar, though faint now compared to the years before, throbbed with a strange ache. Not the familiar sting of Voldemort, but something else, something colder, darker. There's something in the air, Harry muttered, pressing his hand to his forehead. Like the whole world just shuddered. Before Hermione could respond, the doors burst open. Neville stumbled in, dirt smudged across his face and his robes torn at the hem. His chest heaved with exhaustion, and behind him Luna slipped inside, her expression eerily calm despite the urgency. Hogsmeade, Neville gasped. It's under attack. Ginny shot to her feet, so quickly her chair toppled. What? By who? Neville swallowed hard. Not Death Eaters. Worse. I don't even know how to explain it. They're dead. Walking. An army of them. And something huge leading them. Luna's dreamy tone cut through the chaos. The air around them feels hollow, like a vacuum where life should be. They're not just reanimated bodies. They're bound by a will. Her wide eyes met Hermione's. You know whose will that is. Hermione's throat went dry. Belladonna. Harry didn't wait for debate. We have to go. Now. If Hogsmeade falls, every wizarding family still holding out hope will think it's the end. Ginny's jaw set in determination. Then we make sure it doesn't fall. Within minutes, The group was racing down the ministry corridors. Aurors shouted orders, scrambling to assemble strike teams. The fireplaces of the Flu network flared green as wizards and witches stepped through, wands at the ready, faces pale but resolute. As they neared the atrium, Hermione felt her heart pound harder. She had read about necromancy in obscure, banned texts, ancient rituals lost to time, meant to be impossible. And yet Belladonna had made it real. The knowledge chilled her to her core. When they arrived in Hogsmeade, the village was already chaos. Flames licked at rooftops. The air was thick with ash and smoke. Screams echoed from alleys where villagers ran, chased by skeletal warriors wielding rusted swords and jagged wands that sparked with unnatural magic. The towering knight at the front of the horde swung its massive blade, cutting through the stone wall of honeydukes as if it were parchment. The building collapsed in a roar of dust and rubble. Harry raised his wand immediately. Stupefy! The red jet of light struck one of the skeletal soldiers, but instead of falling, it staggered, bones rattling, before rising again unharmed. Hermione's stomach dropped. Stunners don't work, she shouted. They're not alive to begin with. Ginny, already darting toward a group of villagers trapped behind a burning cart, yelled back. Then what does? Hermione's mind raced as she dodged a swipe from a skeletal wand. Ancient magic, she thought desperately. Destruction magic. Fire. Light. Purification spells. She pointed her wand skyward, slashing the air. Incendio Maxima. Flames erupted, engulfing 3 of the corpses. Unlike the stunning spell, the fire caught and clung, burning through brittle bone until they collapsed into ash. Relief surged through her. Fire works. Burn them. Neville's voice rang out, strong despite his fear. Then let's give them an inferno. He swept his wand wide, sending a surge of flames roaring across the street, taking down a cluster of skeletons. But the knight was unaffected. It strode forward through the fire, each step shaking the ground. Its glowing helm turned toward Harry, who braced himself, wand ready. Go for the big one, Ginny shouted. No, Hermione countered sharply, pulling Harry back as the knight raised its blade. It's not just brute force, it's bound by something deeper. If we destroy it wrong, the rest of the army might scatter into chaos or worse, turn uncontrollable. The knight's blade came crashing down, forcing Harry to roll aside. Sparks flew as the ground split. Hermione's mind spun frantically. This wasn't just a battle. This was a test. Belladonna was sending a message, and if they failed here, the wizarding world's last shred of unity would burn alongside Hogsmeade. She tightened her grip on her wand, eyes narrowing at the knight. Somewhere, hidden beneath all that dark magic, there had to be a weakness. She only hoped they could find it before the entire village was ground into dust. The knight's blade crashed into the cobblestones again, sending shards of rock flying. Harry and Neville shielded themselves just in time, but the sheer force knocked them back. Villagers screamed and scattered, some darting for safety while others huddled together, wands trembling in their hands. Ginny's hair stuck to her soot-covered face as she shot another fire spell at the skeletal horde, forcing them back. We can't keep this up forever, she shouted, her voice raw. There are too many. Hermione's eyes stayed fixed on the knight. It wasn't just another soldier. It was the heart of this army. Its aura of cold, oppressive magic was suffocating. Every time it moved, the lesser skeletons seemed to grow bolder, their attacks sharper. It was like the knight's existence fueled them. Harry, panting, asked, Any ideas, Hermione? Her mind was racing, flipping through everything she had ever read. Necromancy bound through anchors. Magical constructs linked to talismans. Spirits tethered to objects. The knight wasn't a mindless brute. It was sustained by something more. We need to break the connection, Hermione shouted. It's not about overpowering it. It's about severing whatever's binding it to Belladonna. As if in response, the knight raised its helm toward her. For a moment, Hermione swore she heard a voice, a whisper of chains dragging, a low groan of something ancient and trapped. Her blood ran cold. It knows, she whispered. It knows I understand. Neville stepped forward, gripping his wand with unusual steadiness. Then we don't give it a chance to react. He turned to Harry. Cover me. Before Harry could argue, Neville charged, flames erupting from his wand to clear a path. He hurled himself at the knight, slashing his wand downward with a raw, desperate spell. Defindo Maxima. The crimson arc of energy tore into the knight's side, knocking a chunk of its armored ribcage loose. But instead of crumbling, the fragments scattered across the ground, glowing with faint runes. Hermione's eyes widened. "There!" she yelled. "Those runes, it's carved into the bones themselves. That's the anchor." Harry immediately swung his wand, blasting a line of skeletons away from Neville. "So we destroy the runes?" "Yes," Hermione cried. "Every single one." The group worked furiously. Ginny whipped her wand in vicious arcs, flames scorching the runes etched into broken skulls and ribs. Neville hacked apart the glowing fragments with slicing spells. Harry sent explosions tearing through clusters, shattering bone and fire alike. But the knight wasn't slowing. In fact, it roared, an ear-splitting, hollow sound that rattled their bones. It swung its sword again, this time slamming it into the ground and sending a shockwave racing outward. The force knocked Hermione flat onto her back, her wand flying from her grasp. Her vision swam. Dust clogged her throat. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw it. A fragment of bone embedded into the knight's chest, glowing brighter than all the others, pulsing with malevolent life. "The core," she whispered hoarsely. "It's in its chest." Scrambling to her knees, she screamed at Harry. "Aim for the chest, now." Harry didn't hesitate. He raised his wand high, summoning every ounce of power he could muster. Confringo! The explosion slammed into the knight's chest. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the bone cracked, the rune glowing frantically, and the knight let out a final roar before shattering into a storm of fragments. The remaining skeletons froze mid-step. For a second, they stood still, wands raised, weapons lifted. Then, one by one, they collapsed into lifeless piles of bones, the unnatural light fading from their sockets. Silence fell. Only the crackle of flames and the sobs of survivors broke the stillness. Hermione dragged herself up, chest heaving. Relief washed through her, but it was sharp, bitter. Because she knew this was just the beginning. Far away, in the shadows of a crumbling manor, Belladonna stood before a crystal orb, her lips curled in amusement as the image of the shattered knight faded. She had seen it all, their desperation, their ingenuity, their victory. She laughed softly. "Good. Struggle harder. Break yourselves against my trials. When I come for you myself, there will be nothing left." Her fingers traced the edge of the orb, and in her eyes burned the promise of a storm yet to come. The smoke over Hogsmeade clung to the air like a shroud, heavy with the stench of burnt wood and scorched bone. The once bustling streets were littered with rubble, shattered glass, and lifeless remains of skeletons that only an hour ago had marched with terrifying precision. Now they were nothing more than brittle piles, silent testimony to the battle that had nearly broken the village. Harry leaned against a half-collapsed wall, every muscle trembling from the exertion of the fight. His wand hand shook uncontrollably, though he tried to hide it. He glanced around at the villagers, their wide eyes, their ash-streaked faces, their whispered prayers. "They were ready to die," Harry murmured, almost to himself. "If we hadn't come," he couldn't finish. Hermione, brushing soot from her robes, swallowed hard. "We only stopped a piece of her power. If Belladonna can raise something like that night, something bound with runes and controlled from afar, then we're fighting against more than dark magic. We're fighting against someone who's rewriting the rules of it." Madame Rosmerta, clothes torn and hands trembling, stepped out of the wreckage of the 3 broomsticks. "Is it over?" she asked in a voice thin with fear. Ginny shook her head grimly. "For now. But she'll send more." The weight of those words pressed down on the survivors. Some villagers broke into sobs. Others clung to one another, whispering that they should flee, that Hogsmeade was no longer safe. For the first time, Harry realized just how much Belladonna had already achieved. Not just destruction, but fear. She was breaking their spirit. Neville stepped forward, face pale but resolute. "Then we can't run. If we run, we give her exactly what she wants." Hogsmeade stood against Death Eaters. "We'll stand against this too." His words carried more strength than Harry expected. A few villagers straightened. A man who had been clutching his child looked up, determination slowly replacing despair. Hermione placed a hand on Neville's shoulder, pride flickering in her tired eyes. "You're right, but we'll need to organize. Defensive wards, trained guards, communication lines with the ministry. We can't wait for another attack. At the mention of the ministry, Harry's jaw clenched. He knew how slow, how blind, how hesitant they could be. But this time wasn't just about red tape. It was about survival. I'll talk to Kingsley, he said firmly. He has to see this for what it is. As if summoned by his words, the air cracked with the sound of apparition. Aurors in dark uniforms appeared in the square, their wands raised, eyes scanning the wreckage. At their head was Kingsley Shacklebolt himself, tall and commanding, his presence a beacon amid the ruin. He took in the devastation with a single sweep of his gaze before locking eyes with Harry. Reports said Hogsmeade was under attack. I didn't realize. His voice trailed as his eyes fell on the heaps of bones. Hermione stepped forward quickly, her words urgent. They weren't just skeletons. They were bound constructs powered through runes. And there was a night, something greater. We only stopped it by destroying the anchor in its chest. Kingsley's expression darkened. Then she's testing us. Probing our defenses. Testing. Ginny repeated bitterly, her voice cracking. People died, Kingsley. Families lost their homes. How much more proof do you need that she's already waging war? The Auror commander met her eyes, his tone steady but grim. I don't need proof. I need allies willing to fight. And after what I've seen here today, it's clear the front lines aren't in some distant field. They're here. In our streets. His words rippled through the crowd like a spark in dry tinder. Fear was still heavy, but alongside it, something else began to stir, resolve. Harry stepped closer to Kingsley, lowering his voice so only he could hear. You saw what she can do. If she's raising things like that, what happens when she sends an army? Kingsley didn't answer immediately. He turned, looking once more at the wreckage of Hogsmeade, his jaw tight. Then he finally said, Then we prepare for war. And this time, Harry, we can't afford to be divided. The Order, the Ministry, Hogwarts, all of us, or none of us survive. Hermione's stomach nodded. She thought of the students at Hogwarts, of the younger children who had never seen battle. She thought of the long nights ahead, studying every scrap of ancient magic she could find, desperately searching for a way to counter Belladonna's necromancy. And she thought of the whispers she had heard when the knight looked at her, that haunting sound of chains, as if something ancient had recognized her. Belladonna wasn't just raising an army. She was awakening something, and Hermione feared that none of them were ready for what came next. The fires in Hogsmeade smoldered late into the night, sending dark plumes that curled against the stars. Harry stayed long enough to help clear the bodies, but his mind was already racing ahead to what Kingsley had said, war. Not just another skirmish, not another raid like the Death Eaters had waged. This would be something far darker. By morning, the group had returned to Hogwarts. The castle loomed in the mist, its towers sharp against the gray sky. Students clustered in small knots on the lawns, whispering anxiously, having heard rumors of what happened in the village. When Harry, Hermione, and Ginny crossed the courtyard with soot still clinging to their robes, the whispers grew into silence. Everyone was watching. Professor McGonagall was waiting at the entrance hall. She looked as though she hadn't slept, her stern face carved with worry. Inside. All of you, she said briskly, ushering them into her office. The portraits on the walls stirred, muttering as they saw the soot, the bruises, the exhaustion written across the young faces. Kingsley had already arrived, along with a few senior Aurors. Maps of the castle, the Forbidden Forest, and even the outskirts of Hogsmeade were spread across McGonagall's desk. Candles burned low, dripping wax that hardened like scars against the wood. What you saw last night, Kingsley began, was not a raid. It was a test. Belladonna wanted to know how quickly we'd respond, how much resistance she'd meet. She now knows she'll face both Hogwarts and the Ministry. And she'll plan accordingly, Hermione said tightly, her fingers brushing the map of Hogsmeade. She's experimenting with constructs. The night was designed to measure our limits. She'll improve it. Next time it won't fall so easily. McGonagall's lips pressed into a line. You suggest this was easy, Miss Granger? Hermione flushed. No, Professor. Only that Belladonna is learning from us. Every spell we cast, every tactic we use, she'll adapt. Ginny slammed her hand on the desk, making the maps flutter. Then we adapt faster. We stop waiting for her to strike, and find a way to strike first. The room stilled. The portraits muttered disapprovingly, but McGonagall's sharp eyes didn't dismiss the idea outright. Kingsley, however, shook his head. You don't understand. Belladonna doesn't fight like Voldemort did. She doesn't gather followers through ideology or fear, she builds them. She creates her army. Every soldier we destroy, she can replace. We cannot outnumber her. Then we outthink her, Harry said firmly. All eyes turned to him. He looked weary, older than his years, but his voice carried the same fire it always had when he stepped into battles he never wanted but could never abandon. She's using runes, rituals, magic older than Hogwarts itself. We need to understand it. If we can find the source of her power, the well she's drawing from, we can cut her off. Hermione nodded quickly, seizing the thread. The knight's anchor was inscribed with symbols I've never seen in any Hogwarts textbook. But I recognized pieces of them. They're similar to binding runes from the Druids, and others looked almost Norse. She's weaving traditions together in ways no one has dared. McGonagall's gaze flicked to her. Do you think you can decipher them? I'll have to, Hermione said quietly. Because if we don't, she'll make something worse. For a long moment, silence held the room, broken only by the soft crackle of the candles. Then Kingsley leaned over the maps. Very well. We divide our efforts. The Aurors will establish stronger wards around Hogsmeade. Hogwarts will become a fortified stronghold. And you, his eyes settled on Harry, Hermione, and Ginny, will focus on unraveling the runes. If Belladonna has found a way to create an army that doesn't bleed, that doesn't fear, then knowledge is the only weapon that matters. The decision weighed heavily on all of them. Outside the window, the sky darkened as rain began to fall, streaking the glass like tears. Far away, in a place none of them could yet see, Belladonna knelt in the center of a cavern carved with glowing sigils. She traced her fingers over the runes etched into stone, whispering words that had not been spoken aloud in centuries. Around her, bones stirred, slowly knitting themselves into forms both humanoid and monstrous. But at the heart of the cavern, suspended above a black pool, was something different, a coffin bound in chains of silver, humming with energy. Belladonna smiled faintly as her hand hovered above it. The night was only the first, she whispered. Soon, I'll wake the one who sleeps. And when I do, even Hogwarts will bow. The cavern was alive with whispers. They rose from the runes etched into the walls, from the cracks in the earth, even from the black water that lapped softly beneath the chained coffin. Belladonna closed her eyes and let the voices flow through her like a current. They were not mad ramblings. No, they were instructions, fragments of power waiting to be pieced together. Her pale fingers hovered over the silver chains that bound the coffin. They pulsed faintly, as though they still resisted her magic. She traced the sigils carved into them. Old magic. Ancient wards placed by those who had feared what slept inside. You were locked away because they were weak, she whispered, voice echoing in the cavern. But I am not them. I will set you free. The bones she had summoned earlier clattered into shape around her, forming grotesque guardians that knelt at her command. Their hollow sockets glowed faintly with blue fire. She smiled. They were crude, disposable. What she was about to unleash would be different, alive, terrible, eternal. She raised her wand, chanting. Runes along the cavern walls flared brighter, threads of magic weaving themselves toward the coffin. The black pool rippled violently, as if resisting. Belladonna's voice only grew stronger. From inside the coffin came the faintest sound, a thud. Once. Twice. Like something trying to wake. Belladonna's eyes widened in delight. Yes. Stir. It is time. But before she could continue, the cavern shuddered. The chains glowed hot white, lashing out sparks that forced her back a step. Something, or someone still fought to keep the prisoner contained. She snarled, lifting her wand to counter. You cannot stop me. I am his daughter. The chains quieted slightly, though they did not break. Belladonna steadied her breathing. She knew then that this would take more than raw force. She would need the exact sequence of runes, the precise ritual, to undo what had been sealed here centuries ago. And she had time. At Hogwarts, Hermione buried herself in the library's restricted section. Dusty tomes lay scattered across the table, filled with cracked ink and faded symbols. Harry sat beside her, reading what he could, though the texts often blurred into nonsense without her sharp mind guiding him. Ginny stood nearby, arms crossed, impatient with the endless turning of pages. "I still don't see how reading will stop Belladonna," Ginny muttered. "Every second we waste, she's making more of those things." "Because knowledge is the only chance we have," Hermione snapped, though her eyes never left the book. "These runes aren't just decorative. They're part of a language. If we can understand it, we can dismantle her constructs before they even rise." Harry frowned, tapping one of the pages. "This one, doesn't it look like the symbol that glowed on the knight's chest?" Hermione leaned in, her breath catching. "Yes, that's a binding sigil. But it's been modified. Twisted. If she's weaving binding with animation," she trailed off pale, "she isn't just creating an army. She's trying to unlock something sealed away." Ginny froze. "Like what?" Hermione looked up at them, eyes dark with fear. "Something powerful enough that ancient wizards chose to bury it instead of destroy it. Because they couldn't." Harry's stomach sank. A memory rose unbidden. Of facing the basilisk, of watching Voldemort rise again, of every monster the wizarding world had thought impossible until it wasn't. He looked at Hermione, voice low. "Then we'd better find out what she's trying to wake. Before she does." Far beneath them, in the cavern, the coffin pulsed once more. The sound of chains groaning echoed like distant thunder. Belladonna smiled, lowering her wand. She could wait. She could prepare. When the time came, Hogwarts would face not just her constructs, but something far older, something that had been waiting to rise again. The library was so silent that even the sound of pages turning seemed thunderous. Hermione leaned over a tome so ancient its spine crumbled at her touch. Her quill scratched furiously as she copied symbols into her notes, connecting them with lines of interpretation. Harry watched her, knowing the way her brow furrowed meant she was on the edge of a breakthrough. "This rune here," she said suddenly, tapping a jagged mark inked across the parchment. "It doesn't just bind. It suppresses essence. Not just physical force, but something more primal. Whoever carved it wasn't afraid of a creature's strength. They were afraid of its very presence." Ginny shifted uncomfortably. "You're making it sound less like a monster and more like a god." Hermione didn't reply, but the grim set of her jaw was answer enough. Harry leaned forward. "If Belladonna's trying to break those chains, then whatever's inside was never meant to be woken," Hermione finished. "If she succeeds, she won't need an army. She'll have something that could raise Hogwarts without lifting a wand." The weight of her words pressed down on them. Harry felt it in his chest, cold and heavy. He remembered the cavern, the suffocating sense of wrongness that had lingered even after the constructs had been destroyed. That coffin was no ordinary prison. "Then we stop her before she finishes," Harry said firmly. "No matter what it takes." At the edge of the table, Luna, who had been quiet for hours, finally spoke in her dreamlike tone. "You might not be able to stop her directly. People like Belladonna, they thrive on confrontation. But if you understand the chains better than she does, you might not need to fight her. You could strengthen them." Hermione looked at her, surprised. "Reinforce the seal?" Luna nodded calmly. "If she's trying to undo the lock, then perhaps you can add another. Layers upon layers. She may be clever, but she isn't you." For the first time in hours, Hermione's face lit with something other than fear. "That's it. We don't just prepare for battle. We weave protections into the very seal she's tampering with. If she missteps, it won't open, it will collapse on her." Ginny gave a tight smile. "I like the sound of that." But while hope flickered at Hogwarts, Belladonna stood once more before the coffin in the cavern. She had spent hours etching runes into the earth, each one glowing faintly red. The Guardians of Bone shuffled restlessly behind her, as though even they sensed the growing power. Her wand arced through the air, drawing fire into the shapes she carved. She chanted words not in any human tongue, her voice echoing unnaturally. The cavern responded, the black water boiling, the chains rattling in their sockets. And then movement. The coffin shifted violently, as though something inside had rolled against its walls. Dust cascaded into the water below. Belladonna's lips curved into a hungry smile. "Soon. So soon." A sound rose then, not from the coffin but from deep within the earth itself. A low moan, like air rushing through 1,000 hollow lungs. Even she faltered for a heartbeat, her smile flickering. But then she straightened, eyes blazing. They buried you because they feared you, she hissed. But I am not afraid. The chains pulsed once more, and for the first time, a faint light seeped through the cracks of the coffin, green and sickly, painting Belladonna's face in eerie hues. At Hogwarts, Hermione froze mid-sentence. Her quill slipped from her hand. Harry saw her eyes widen in alarm. "What is it?" he asked quickly. She whispered, "The seal, it just weakened. She's closer than I thought." The candles in the library guttered, though no wind stirred. Ginny drew her wand instinctively, while Luna only stared upward, eyes distant, as though she could hear the same sound Hermione had felt through the runes. Hermione slammed her book shut, face pale but determined. "We don't have time for endless study anymore. We need to get to the cavern. If we're too late—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Harry nodded grimly. "Then we go tonight." And deep below, Belladonna knelt by the coffin, pressing her hand against its surface. For the briefest moment, she felt something press back. The night pressed down on Hogwarts like a suffocating blanket. Clouds smothered the moon, and the grounds were drowned in shadow. Harry, Hermione, Ginny, and Luna slipped silently out of the castle, their cloaks tight around them. The air was unnaturally still, as though even the wind dared not disturb the world. Hermione carried more than her wand. Her satchel bulged with runes she had painstakingly copied, small vials of powdered crystal, and a strip of enchanted parchment she had inscribed with new protective sigils. She walked quickly, eyes sharp, her mind buzzing with calculation. "This path takes us around the lake," she whispered. "If she's still performing the ritual, the magic should draw us straight to her." Ginny's hand gripped her wand so tightly her knuckles whitened. "I hope it does. The sooner we end this, the better." Luna, walking at the rear, hummed faintly under her breath, her dreamy eyes fixed on the sky. "The stars are hidden tonight. That usually means something wants to come through." Harry glanced back at her, unsettled. "Something?" She tilted her head, smiling faintly. "Yes. Not someone. Something." They pressed on. The further they moved from the castle, the heavier the air grew. Harry could feel it pressing on his chest, the same suffocating pressure he had felt in the cavern before. His scar prickled faintly, as if reacting to the dark force gathering below. When they reached the cliffs overlooking the Black Lake, Hermione paused, scanning the rocky ground. "Here," she said. "There's a fissure, narrow, but it leads down. It's the same path she must be using." Harry peered into the crack, where faint red light pulsed like a heartbeat. The sound of chanting drifted upward, distorted but unmistakable. Ginny muttered, "She's already started again." Hermione crouched, pulling a vial from her satchel. "Before we go down there, I need to do this." She sprinkled powdered crystal across the stones, whispering an incantation. The dust flared into a web of golden lines that spread outward like roots. "It'll mask our magical signatures. If we're lucky, she won't sense us immediately." Harry nodded. "Good. Because the second she does, we'll lose the element of surprise." They descended one by one into the narrow fissure. The air grew damp and hot, the stones slick beneath their boots. The chanting grew louder, echoing in the cavernous space below. And then they reached it. The cavern stretched before them, vast and dripping with shadows. The black water rippled faintly, reflecting the red glow of Belladonna's runes. The coffin loomed at the center, its chains glowing with strained light. They were vibrating now, shuddering as though they might snap at any second. Belladonna stood before it, arms raised, her hair wild, her eyes burning with manic triumph. Bone constructs crowded the edges of the cavern, their hollow sockets glowing faintly blue as they twitched restlessly, awaiting her command. Harry felt his pulse pound in his ears. This was it, the heart of her plan, the edge of disaster. Hermione's hand brushed his arm lightly. "If we can just get to the coffin, I can reinforce the chains. But we'll have to distract her." Ginny's lips curved in a fierce grin. "Leave that to me." She raised her wand, but Harry stopped her with a quick motion. "Not yet. We wait until Hermione's ready. Once we strike, it has to be fast." They crouched in the shadows, the red light flickering across their faces. The coffin gave another violent shudder, and for the first time, a deep crack appeared along its surface. A sickly green glow seeped through. Belladonna's voice rose to a fever pitch, her chant echoing like thunder. "Awaken! Awaken and serve me. Hermione's breath caught. She clutched the strip of enchanted parchment like a lifeline. Now, she whispered. Harry and Ginny surged forward from the shadows, spells already forming on their lips, while Luna stood calmly behind them, raising her wand with serene precision. The battle for the coffin had begun. Spells erupted the moment Harry and Ginny burst from the shadows. Harry shouted, "Stupefy!" sending a jet of scarlet light straight toward Belladonna. She deflected it with a flick of her wrist, her lips curving into a sharp, delighted smile. "So," she hissed, her voice echoing unnaturally through the cavern, "you've come to witness the rebirth of true power." Ginny answered with a blazing streak of fire that roared across the stones, scattering two of the bone constructs into fragments. "We came to stop you." Belladonna's laughter was wild, triumphant. She lifted both arms, and the skeletal guardians surged forward, their clawed fingers reaching. Hermione ducked low, clutching the parchment to her chest, and sprinted toward the coffin. "Cover me," she shouted. Luna's voice cut through the chaos, soft but sure. "Reducto." A blast of pale blue light shot from her wand, smashing apart another construct. She moved with eerie calm, every spell precise, as though she were following a rhythm no one else could hear. Harry blocked a clawed strike from a construct with a shield charm, the force reverberating through his arm. The chains binding the coffin rattled violently, glowing weaker by the second. Green light pulsed from the cracks, casting grotesque shadows across the cavern walls. Hermione skidded to her knees beside the coffin. Sweat beaded her brow as she pressed the parchment against one of the chains, muttering incantations in quick, clipped syllables. The runes she had drawn earlier flared, gold seeping into the links like molten metal. But the coffin convulsed with such force that it nearly threw her back. The parchment seared against her skin, burning as if it were alive. She gritted her teeth, forcing the magic to hold. Belladonna's head whipped toward her, fury flashing across her pale features. "You dare touch it?" she shrieked. Her wand lashed through the air, hurling a bolt of green fire straight at Hermione. Harry's heart lurched. "Protego!" He threw himself between them, the shield barely holding as the fire splashed against it, scattering sparks across the stone. "Harry!" Hermione gasped, still clutching the parchment, her hands trembling. "I can't hold it alone. The coffin, it's resisting." Ginny blasted another construct to dust and sprinted toward them. "What do you need?" "Channel into the chain here." Hermione held out her trembling hand, guiding Ginny's wand tipped to the parchment. Together, they poured their magic into it. The golden glow brightened, seeping deeper into the chain, slowing its violent trembling. Belladonna's scream of rage shook the cavern. "No, it will not be bound again." She slammed her wand down, and the ground split, sending jagged spikes of stone hurtling toward them. Luna raised her wand lazily, as though brushing away a cobweb. Depulso. The spikes ricocheted back, shattering against the walls. She blinked slowly, her voice carrying with eerie clarity. "You don't understand what you're summoning, Belladonna. It doesn't serve. It devours." Belladonna's expression twisted. "And yet it will bend to me." The coffin buckled again, the crack widening, a claw-like shadow pressing against the gap from within. A guttural roar echoed, shaking the cavern, as if something immense and ancient had stirred. Hermione's voice cracked as she shouted, "It's breaking through. Hold the chain." She poured every ounce of strength she had into the rune-bound parchment, sweat dripping down her face. Ginny gritted her teeth beside her, her wand glowing with strain. Harry locked eyes with Belladonna across the cavern. Her face was lit by the coffin's sickly green glow, her smile feverish. He realized with horror that she wanted it loose, that she wasn't afraid at all. If they didn't stop her now, nothing would. The coffin shuddered with a violent crack, green light spilling like poisonous mist into the cavern. From inside came a low, guttural growl, thick with hunger and malice, vibrating through every stone. Dust rained from the ceiling as the magic holding the place together faltered. Hermione pressed the parchment tighter against the chain, her voice hoarse as she chanted, "Tenera! Vinsire! Contain it!" The golden light sputtered, nearly breaking under the weight of the darkness clawing to escape. Ginny strained beside her, her wand glowing white-hot, her face pale with effort. Harry turned just in time to block another curse from Belladonna. The force of it drove him back across the cavern floor, his boots scraping against stone. She advanced, her eyes glowing with wild triumph, her hair whipping about her face, as if caught in a storm only she could feel. "You can't stop it," she said, her voice a whisper threaded with venom. "This power doesn't want to be contained. It was meant for me." Harry's anger surged, his knuckles white around his wand. "You sound exactly like Voldemort. And we all know how he ended." Belladonna laughed, but the sound cracked under the coffin's roar. Voldemort lacked vision. He craved immortality. I crave something greater. I will become more than human. More than a witch. This creature is mine to command. Her wand slashed downward, and a surge of dark energy rippled through the air. Harry barely rolled aside as the ground split where he had stood, molten green flames spilling from the fissure. Luna's calm voice rose behind him. "Finite." With a delicate wave, the fire flickered and snuffed, leaving only smoldering cracks. Her gaze fixed on Belladonna, her tone dreamlike but unshaken. "You are wrong. You don't command things like this. You invite them in. And once they are here, they never leave." For the first time, Belladonna faltered, her eyes narrowing. But her hesitation vanished as the coffin roared again. A skeletal claw, wreathed in green fire, thrust through the widening crack in the lid, clutching at the air. Hermione screamed over the din, "It's breaking free." "I can't hold the chains. Harry, do something." Harry didn't think. He sprinted across the cavern, dodging a jet of black light Belladonna hurled at him. He reached Hermione and Ginny, dropping to his knees beside them. Without pausing, he pressed his wand against the parchment, forcing his magic into the seal. The parchment vibrated violently, the runes flickering between gold and red as the coffin fought against them. The chains glowed brighter, but still the claw pushed farther, forcing the links to stretch, groan, and twist. The roar shook Harry's chest, nearly making him drop his wand. Belladonna screamed in delight. "Yes! Come forth. Show them your power." Harry's voice was raw as he shouted back. "We're not letting it out." He pushed harder, his magic merging with Hermione's and Ginny's. For a moment, the golden light surged, sealing another crack. But the coffin answered with an explosive pulse that hurled all three backward. They skidded across the stone floor, gasping, their wands flickering. Belladonna advanced, her smile cruel. "Your children playing with forces you cannot comprehend. Step aside and I will show you true mastery." Luna raised her wand once more, her pale eyes fixed not on Belladonna but on the coffin. Her voice was soft, almost like a prayer. "You don't belong here. Go back to where you came from." The parchment on the chain flickered, pulsing in rhythm with her words. For a fleeting moment, the coffin went still, the claw twitching uncertainly. Hermione's head snapped toward Luna. "She's weakening it, keep going." But Belladonna shrieked and hurled a curse at Luna with vicious force. Harry leapt to his feet, deflecting it just in time. The blast sent sparks exploding through the cavern, shadows whipping wildly across the walls. The coffin shuddered violently again, the crack widening further. A second claw scraped its way through, skeletal fingers scratching against stone, the sound splitting through the chamber like nails on glass. Hermione's heart sank. If it gets fully out, we won't be able to stop it. Harry knew she was right. It was now or never. He lifted his wand high, his voice shaking but resolute. "Together, now. All of us." Ginny and Hermione scrambled back to their feet. Luna turned, raising her wand as well. For beams of magic shot toward the chains at once, their light blinding, their voices merging in one desperate incantation. The coffin screamed, an unearthly, inhuman sound that ripped through their ears and rattled their bones. And then the lid burst open. The lid blasted upward with a thunderous crack, slamming against the cavern's ceiling and shattering into splinters of stone and bone. From the coffin rose a surge of blinding green fire, flooding the chamber with shadows that writhed and twisted like living things. Out of the inferno climbed the creature. It was taller than any man, its form skeletal yet sinewy, skin stretched thin over bones that seemed half-rotted, half-forged of blackened steel. Its eyes glowed with molten emerald fire, burning pits that pierced through flesh and soul alike. Its wings, if they could be called that, were ragged, torn membranes of shadow that scraped the cavern walls as they unfurled. The air grew foul, thick with a stench of death and old magic, as though every grave in the world had been disturbed at once. Hermione's voice was a broken whisper. That's not a beast. That's something else entirely. The creature's head snapped toward her, its jaw unhinging in an inhuman shriek. The sound cracked the chains that still clung to its body, the runes on the parchment sizzling to ash. Sparks of gold light scattered like fireflies and died. Belladonna's face lit up with rapture. She stepped forward, her wand raised, her arms spread as though greeting an old friend. Yes, at last. You are mine. The creature turned its burning eyes toward her. For a heartbeat, silence fell, thick and heavy. Then it lunged. Its claw struck the ground where Belladonna had stood, stone exploding beneath its force. She was flung back, rolling across the cavern floor, her triumphant cry twisting into a scream of shock. Harry seized the chance. It doesn't obey you, he shouted, his voice raw against the echoes. You've unleashed something you can't control. Belladonna staggered to her feet, fury burning in her expression. No, it's mine. It must be. She thrust her wand at the creature, incantations spilling from her lips like a flood. Beams of red, black, and violet light shot into the beast's chest. The creature barely flinched. Its clawed hand swung outward, catching the spells and twisting them back into streams of fire that lashed against the cavern walls. The entire chamber shook. A jagged fissure ripped across the floor, forcing Harry, Hermione, Ginny, and Luna to stumble back. Hermione grabbed Harry's arm. It's not just some monster. It's ancient, something summoned, not created. It doesn't answer to her or anyone. The beast turned again, its gaze sweeping over them. Harry felt the weight of its stare press down on him like the crushing of 1,000 chains. His lungs tightened, his scar seared with white-hot pain, and for a terrifying instant he thought he heard Voldemort's voice whispering inside his mind. But then he realized it wasn't Voldemort. It was older, darker, a hunger that predated all wizards. Luna's soft voice cut through the chaos. It wants freedom. It doesn't care who gave it form. Ginny clenched her wand tighter, her jaw set. Then we can't let it leave this place. The creature roared, the sound so violent that stalactites rained from the ceiling. It beat its ragged wings once, the gust nearly throwing them off their feet. Shadows writhed up the cavern walls like serpents, clawing toward the surface tunnels. Belladonna's laughter broke through the din, wild, desperate, and trembling. If I can't command it, I'll unleash it upon the world. Let them all know the power of Voldemort's heir. She raised her wand high and screamed a word none of them had ever heard before. The beast's eyes flared brighter, its wings spreading wide. With a deafening crack, it smashed through the cavern roof, blasting upward into the night sky in a storm of fire and stone. Harry and the others shielded their faces as debris rained around them. Dust choked the air. When it cleared, only Belladonna's silhouette remained, standing on the edge of the fissure, her gaze fixed upward, her expression alight with madness. Harry's chest heaved, his eyes following the streak of green fire tearing through the heavens. It's loose, he whispered. Hermione's face went pale. And if we don't stop it soon, the world will burn. The night sky above the shattered cavern burned with emerald fire. The unleashed creature tore through the clouds, leaving streaks of black smoke and sparks of green lightning in its wake. Its roar shook the earth, sending tremors that rattled the mountains for miles. Harry's heart pounded as he staggered to his feet, his wand raised though it felt useless against such a force. Hermione, Ginny, and Luna regrouped at his side, their faces pale but determined. Belladonna stood apart, her eyes wild, her laughter echoing off the broken stone. You see, she screamed, her hair whipping in the wind. This is my legacy. My father dreamed of ruling the world, but I... She pointed upward at the beast, her voice cracking with hysteria. I will remake it in fire and shadow. Harry's voice rang out, steady despite the chaos. You've doomed everyone, including yourself. Belladonna sneered. Then I'll drag you all down with me. She raised her wand, sending a streak of blood-red magic straight at Harry. He dove aside, the curse scorching the ground. Ginny retaliated instantly, blasting a jet of orange flame that forced Belladonna back. The clash of spells lit the cavern ruins like a battlefield. Above, the creature circled, its shrieks splitting the air. Each beat of its ragged wings summoned storms. Lightning forked down, striking the mountainside. Boulders crashed, rivers of molten stone beginning to seep from cracks in the earth. Hermione's mind raced. It's bound by ancient summoning. If it was brought here, it can be banished. We need to turn the ritual against itself. Harry locked eyes with her, understanding dawning. Together, then. Luna stepped forward, her voice calm even as the sky fell apart. It feeds on chaos. If we channel harmony, light against shadow, it won't have strength to hold this world. The four of them formed a circle, wands raised. Their voices weaving together incantations Hermione shouted over the roar. Threads of gold, silver, and blue light spun upward, intertwining into a net of brilliance. The magic resonated deep, not just in their wands but in their hearts. Belladonna screamed in fury. No, it's mine. She hurled curses, but Ginny broke from the circle just long enough to block them, her fiery spells colliding with Belladonna's darkness in a storm of sparks. Above, the net of light climbed higher, wrapping around the beast as it descended. It shrieked in defiance, its claws raking the air, but the bonds tightened. The creature's flames sputtered against the woven light, its form flickering, unstable. Harry felt the pull tearing through him, the beast's hunger clawing at his scar, whispering promises of power, immortality, freedom. He grit his teeth, forcing the voice down, pouring every ounce of will into the spell. "We're stronger together," he shouted, more to himself than anyone else. Hermione's voice cracked but held. "Back to the void you came from." With a final surge, their combined magic exploded into blinding radiance. The net contracted, crushing the beast in a storm of light. Its roar turned from fury to anguish, echoing like thunder as its body dissolved into ash and shadow, pulled screaming back into the void. The sky cleared. The fire, the storms, the tremors, all gone. Silence fell, heavy and fragile. Belladonna staggered forward, her eyes wide with disbelief. No, it can't be gone." She raised her wand again, but her hand shook. "I'll bring it back. I'll." Ginny's stunner hit her square in the chest. Belladonna crumpled, her wand falling from her grasp, her madness silenced at last. The four of them stood amidst the ruins, their breaths ragged, their magic spent. The cavern was nothing but rubble and dust, the coffin shattered, its darkness gone. Harry lowered his wand, staring at the stars above. For the first time in what felt like forever, the sky was clear. "It's over," he whispered. Hermione placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes shining with exhaustion but relief. "Yes. For now." Ginny exhaled, her fiery determination softening. "And when the world asks who stopped it, I'll tell them, we all did." Luna gazed at the fallen Belladonna, her voice distant but sure. "Darkness never really ends. But tonight we gave light a chance." The four of them turned together, leaving the ruins behind as dawn broke on the horizon. The shadows had been banished, the creature destroyed, Belladonna defeated. The war was not over, but hope, fragile, precious, had returned. And as the first rays of sunlight touched their faces, Harry knew one truth more than any other. Whatever darkness came, they would face it together.